Welcome to the shinobi world where both death and love coexist together today. Here is the summary. It was their last, desperate gambit. Their last hope. They pinned everything on a prayer that he could save them, and now, he's not even sure if he can make it count anymore. Now let's begin on the story of what if Naruto was sent to a parallel universe. The war was over. They had lost. It hadn't crept up on them. It hadn't been sudden. Their defeat had not been a great plunge from the heights of uncertainty, where one battle, one event, turned the tide. No. Theirs was the slow death, victims to a constrictor, the relentless tide of tireless, once dead, foes pushing against the always dwindling resistance. More than the shinobi world, human life itself, faced a slow, steady and implacable extinction. Konoha had been the first. After Pain's attack, with no infrastructure to speak of, the village was weakest of all in terms of logistics. Toby had capitalized on that, using the fact that Konoha had no records, no effective way to organize their forces other than word of mouth down from on high from the Hokage. With the administrative functions so invariably crippled, the Leaf Village soon collapsed, their ninja scattering to group with the other battle groups. Iwa was next, after Inoki's death. The old man was so dead set on keeping his seat until someone was worthy to replace him. No one was actually prepared to replace him when the moment came. With all Jounin and Anbu on the front lines, a coordinated effort from Iwagakure's elders couldn't be made to name a replacement. And by the time the new Tsuchikage Kitsuchi had received word of his anointment, the man was neck deep in an ambush and promptly killed. The immovable rock crumbled beneath the relentless flood. Suna was next. Gaara's power over the Dune Sea had proven absolute, even without the Shukaku. For 30 days the bulk of the enemy forces had descended on Tsunagakure, and for 30 days the Sand Village held strong as the rest of the allies regrouped for one final push at the heart of this cancer. Then, inevitably, the White Messenger Hawk had reached them. They were out of time. A had to move before the full force could regroup, only be returned from a megacure, half dead, carrying news of their defeat. A was dead. Now, only Kirigakure, its shores defended by a stretch of sea and its heart protected by dense fog, mountains, and now, thanks to the Seal Master's work, relentless storms that made the oceans come alive with impossible fury like the famed whirlpools of Uzushiagakure. This alone kept what little of humanity remained safe, for a time. Toby would not be denied, though 10,000 of his creatures were cast back out into the sea, and 1,000 more pushed forward. Kiri fell, and now here they were, the very last vanguard, the most elite of the elite. Men that had survived endless, unremitting war for the better part of 2 years, were guarding their very last, most desperate hope as the enemy forces pounded away at them. It defied the very belief of all human limitations, a marvel of the world. Every manner of seal was calibrated to perfection, impossibly complex, combining, as a foundation, the recovered Uzumaki designs, coupled with sealing arrays from all corners of the shinobi world for the single most intricate collaboration ever made between the shinobi countries. Barrier seals from Iwa, acceleration seals from Kumo, stabilization matrices from Suna, space-time arrays, derived from the summoning animals of Konoha, nature arrays from Kirigakure taken from the vaults of the Shodaime, that had helped create the 7 blades of the swordsman and imbue them with their powers. And lastly, an Uchiha seal array, one based on the displacement of time, derived from the main Gekaios Tsukiyomi technique. More delicate than any one thing ever made in this world, it was also the most powerful and their very last prayer for a miracle to deliver them from this nightmare. You have to stop. You've looked over it 8 times already. It has to be perfect, he answered back. I know, but we have no time. Even if you found something, we can't change anything now. You have to, it has to be perfect, he repeated, moving towards a different spot, eyes roving over the lines of ink spread out over a room half the size of the Hokage Tower, built 3 months ago for this exact purpose. The moment this project moved beyond the dreaming stage and became viable due to sheer desperation, there can't be any mistakes. It has to be. Naruto Sakura's hand shot out, gripping him by the bicep and whirling him around to look at her, bloodshot blue eyes staring into sea green. Naruto, listen to me. You have to stop. You need to focus now. But it has to be. I know, she shouted, interrupting him before her voice softened. I know, but we're done. There are no more last-minute fixes. We have to go with what we have now. She's right, Dobi. Sasuke stepped out from the shadows, dark eyes staring at his old teammates. He's here. Points 5 and 6 are down. 4 is under attack and 3 is setting up its final defenses with my now. After that, all we'll have left is the Hachibi. His name is B, Naruto snarled, looking over the array at his feet despite their words. After a tug and a pull he marched off, moving towards his designated place on the seal, Sasuke and Sakura flanking him. The gold shroud of the Kairubi's chakra coated his body, from the tips of his hair down to his toes. The golden hue surged through him like a living flame for the first time in months, and it felt joyous. The chakra bled into the seal, dark lines becoming clear, then shining with golden light, the brightness spreading over the whole room, as the chakra went into the seal on the floor to crawl up the walls into the arrays that had been drawn into the overhanging roof. The world was light, chains sprouted from the walls, floor and ceiling, 9 chains meeting at the center before the bright flame of the Kyuubi's chakra spread into them, lighting them like tinder that did not burn as energy forked and split between the links to meet in the center. The crackle of power sent goosebumps crawling up his arms, like static electricity only without the harsh sting. He pushed his and Kurama's chakra into the seal, willing this to work. It had to. Then there was a tear. All 9 chains pulled taut, retreating back into their seals, link by agonizingly slow link. With the tear becoming wider and wider, the fabric of reality split open to reveal an abyss of impossibility. It looked like an ocean of churning water in a storm, a spiral of black non-light, a surface as still as a tombstone, the brightest of starlight, the most vibrant of colors, all at the same time, his mind unable or unwilling to attempt to grasp even the concept of what he was looking at. An end to infinity. I can't believe we did it, he whispered to himself, even knowing that this was the easy part. Beside him Sakura threw a look. Sasuke nodded. In the next second Naruto's body was wrapped in a flutter of sealing note pages, with a single scroll coiling around his body. What? He asked, startled as the golden chakra receded back into his seal. He hunched forward, the sudden loss of strength leaving him as he saw the dark, fiery body of the Susanoo form up around him like the walls of an impenetrable fortress. Sasuke, he turned his head to look at the Uchiha. What are you doing? What? We have to, he answered. We have to get you through, Sakura said, walking up beside him. He turned, looking at her, his mind processing what they were saying, a slowly creeping horror dawning on his features. No, he whispered, demanded. No. You said that I lied, she confessed sadly. My calculations always showed that you nor Kyuubi would ever have the power to pull yourself and us back far enough to make enough of a difference. You just pulling back yourself, you'd only be able to get yourself to the very beginning of the war. Naruto's wide, unblinking eyes percolated with tears, his face slack with dumb shock even as Sasuke stepped in front of him, his back to the Jinchuriki, facing the doorway. All our research shows every step is an exponential increase, the Uchiha said. At the first step, you only take 1 day, on the second 2, on the third 4, fifth 8 and so on. There are 4,380 days in 12 years with the exponential growth. We need 11 steps. We can make that, the blonde cried, struggling in his bonds before turning to Sakura, a look of such betrayal in his eyes she felt her heart clench in her chest. You told me I could make that. I lied, she repeated. So how many can I make? If he was close, then at the very best estimates, you can only make 8. And that's if all our calculations are on the marker. We could be completely wrong. He shook his head, the tears dripping down his cheeks to fall off his chin. No, I'll get you there, I'll get you there. Sakura, she shook her head, a brittle smile tugging at her lips. Naruto, she sighed. You don't know how much. There were the sounds of shouts now, of battle reaching in through the outside walls. We have no time, Sasuke demanded, turning to give her a look over his shoulder. She nodded, turning away from Naruto to march in front of Sasuke as the Uchiha reached out, both hands, one to grip her shoulder, the other to grip Naruto's. She reached down, a burst of chakra into the activation rune as tattoos spread from the seal on her forehead to spread over her skin. She did not have years worth of chakra like Tsunade-sama, just barely 1, it would have to be enough. The doorway held open by the 9 chains, thrummed with power, the 9 links spinning like a typhoon, faster and faster, the seals at their feet becoming brighter. Then they were somewhere else, on the edge of nothingness. Sakura felt ground under her feet, sweat beading at her brow as the very perception of all her 5 senses were thrown completely askew. Heat, light, dark, up, down, nothing conformed to her ability to comprehend. She closed her eyes, focusing on Sasuke's hand on her shoulder and ignoring Naruto's struggles in his attempts to escape his restraints. She stood nowhere, and everywhere, her chakra, her tether of life, anchoring her to this place like she would tether herself to the side of a tree, or on a wall. That was the only way it could work. Once she was finished, Sasuke would begin to do the same, so that he could navigate this place that led to nowhere, and everywhere at once. This vast void of nothingness that held the whole of everything within your reach and just beyond. She took 1 step forward, tugging Sasuke with her, and felt her chakra drain out of her. As though the very breath of life fled her body, she hunched over, vomiting, even as her feet stayed rooted to the ground. Not daring to move, she felt Sasuke grip her shoulder, her chakra flowing into him, feeding the massive construct known as Susanoo in his place. Sakura, she heard Naruto shout, no doubt struggling even more. She didn't dare look back, didn't dare look at the hurt, desperate look in his eyes. She tried to smile, it was a brittle thing. Sayonara, Sasuke. Naruto, she felt the Uchiha's hand squeeze her shoulder. She took 1 more step, the last of her chakra drained from her body. She died with barely the whisper of a final breath, the final tether of life sapped from her body as she took a single step into nowhere and she faded into the nothingness of the void of time. Sasuke's chakra surged, and the Uchiha could now feel his feet touch the ground, tugged into this place in the expanse of time by his now dead, or was it perhaps lost, teammate? Damn it. The Uchiha ignored Naruto's curse, eyes staring straight ahead. 3, he breathed, taking one more step instantly. A massive crack thundered through the skull of Susanoo, and Sasuke felt his chakra get sapped from him just like Sakura had. His massive reserves would hold out for another 2 steps under the aegis of the legendary ninjutsu, 3 if he were lucky. 4, he said. One more step, and this time the flames of Susanoo's body dimmed, becoming little more than embers, leaving only the raw chakra construct exposed. With another crack spearing down its chest, Sasuke hissed, reeling as his eyes bled and fire spread through his insides. That's enough, Naruto growled, his voice obviously choked. That's 4, I can get you the rest of the way. Stop. The Uchiha shook his head, eyes bleeding now though Naruto couldn't see it. Have to make sure, Dobi, one more step. This time the legendary construct began crumbling away, the last of the flames dying as the chakra armor was peeled free. Sasuke hunched over, coughing up dark red blood that turned to dust on the winds of time. Stop it, Sasuke, Naruto shouted. I'll take you, just get me out of this. The Uchiha sighed, coughing wetly. We could have miscalculated, Naruto. We have nothing to I don't care, he roared, wisps of gold emerging between the seals as Sasuke's chakra waned dangerously on the restraints. Let me out. Sasuke turned to look over his shoulder, staring with bloody tears at the struggling blonde even as he dragged him. The Uchiha smirked. It was a brittle thing, for what it's worth. He paused, visibly choking down the words. Cursed pride, I always did have to carry your sorry ass through. Before the shout even escaped Naruto's throat, Sasuke took that one final step. Susanoo burst into shards of light, unlike Sakura, girded from the worst of this place by the legendary sword and shield of the main Gekyo, allowed to fade away into this place beyond time. Sasuke had no such defense now, and Naruto watched the Uchiha get ripped to pieces, like a great sandstorm had swept in and peeled the flesh clean off his body before grinding the bones to dust. The paper around him fell away crumbling to sand. The Kyrubi's chakra, so desperate to escape, roared to life as the blonde cried, howling into the void as he clutched at his head, screaming in wild agony. All of them they were, all of them, every last one of his precious people. He cried, clutching and pulling at his hair as he screamed at nothing, at everything. Rage, hatred, sadness, despair. They rushed through him, too powerful to resist, too fast to feel. All he knew was pain. You have to move, Naruto. The blonde didn't respond, still staring at the place in this black abyss that he'd last seen Sasuke, sobbing as he bit his lip hard enough to bleed, the blood crystallizing frozen as it was swept away. Naruto, Kyuubi prodded, his voice a low rumble. You have to keep moving now. The blonde swallowed, fat tears evaporating as they escaped his tear ducts. He took one step. He felt the same enormous drain they had. He took one more. Now, the cloak flickered. When he took his third, the golden hue of his aura vanished, leaving only red, 8 tails trailing behind him. He took one more. 2 tails receded back into him. Kyuubi, they were right. There was one thing we did not take into account. What? The temporal displacement between us and the seal. 11 paces in physical distance, years time difference. My chakra must push through the years to reach it. 3 paces left, 6 tails. Naruto swallowed, too numb to do much more. Are we going to die? No. Walk. He took another step. 3 tails vanished 9 paces. One more. The last of the kitsune's tails receded back into him, the chakra shroud of the 9 tails vanishing, leaving Naruto's flesh to peel away, only to reform in patches and bursts of healing. The blonde grit his teeth, hissing as he kept his feet firmly planted in this place, not daring to move one more step. Kyuubi, move. Stupid ninja, it's you. You're going to die here too, aren't you? Kyuubi, take your step, boy. He opened his eyes to a ceiling he hadn't seen for what felt like a lifetime. For a window of eternity, he stared into that chipped, water bubble paint, smelling his poorly washed sheets, listening to the sounds of Konoha's early morning, utterly motionless. When he finally moved, the sun was rising along the horizon, filtering light in through the blinds of his window. His feet touched the floor, all too small, the leap a little too high. He stumbled, wobbling on unsure legs. He stared at his hands, at himself as best he could. Then he kept walking. When he made it to the bathroom, he found a stepping stool, the same stupid stepping stool he had thrown in a corner somewhere never to use again after he hit 7. It was right there, waiting to be used now. He looked up at his bathroom counter, stepping onto the stool. He looked in the mirror, staring back at his face, his 4-year-old face, like he'd been in his bed. He remained motionless, staring for the longest time at this reflection that shouldn't be. At this thing that was just so wrong. Kyuubi. His eyes glimmered, percolating with tears that didn't quite fall yet as he stared into this stranger in a strange house. Please say something to me. He never noticed himself crying, never noticed his legs give out, never noticed himself falling onto the floor, never noticed his choking sobs or his hysterical screams. He didn't even notice when Inu barged into the room, grabbing him and holding him close as he shouted out orders to the rest of the squad. All he could notice was how quiet it was. What happened? The Sandaime Hokage asked as he marched through the white halls of the Konoha hospital. Unknown, Inu replied. He slept as usual, woke up, marched to the bathroom, then he started screaming. The legendary shinobi shot off question after question as he walked, barely waiting for the response to be over before launching into his next one. Jinjutsu? None that I could detect. Poisons, hallucinogens. Initial results are negative. More thorough testing is being conducted as we speak. Hokage-sama, current status, the seal's integrity, stable as far as we can tell, on both counts, though we've called in the expert in order to verify. The old monkey nodded, about to ask another question before he heard the sound of a struggle. His and Inu's heads jerked up ever so slightly before they were both rushing down the hallway, the Anbu's sword emerging from its scabbard with a glint of polished steel. The door was thrown open to reveal 2 nurses, a doctor and 4 Anbu lined up in front of them, forming a semicircle around a blonde child clutching a surgical blade to his chest. What happened? Hiruzen questioned, his voice unchanged from its usual calm tone. He woke up and started struggling. Hokage-sama, one of the Anbu answered. He took Dr. Koku's scalpel from his coat pocket, cut me good when I tried to grab him too, another Anbu, a younger one, said, showing off the blood-drenched glove on his left hand, an open gash in his palm. He's fast, old man. The Jinchuriki's frightened voice brought Saru's eyes to him, the soft brown orbs softening their placid look to one of mild concern. He stepped forward, past the line of people to get in close to the boy before he knelt in front of him. Naruto-chan, he cooed at the 4-year-old holding out his hand. Naruto-chan, come here. The boy's white-knuckled grip on the surgical knife tightened even further, and for a brief instant he thought the child might actually try to strike out at him. Then the boy launched himself forward with a hysterical cry, hugging the Sandaime so fiercely Sarutobi could actually feel his robe ready to tear as the toddler cried into his chest, babbling nonsense he couldn't understand. Only one thing stood out. They're gone. They're all gone. Who they were and where they could have gone the Hokage didn't hold the foggiest notion. Picking up the boy, he whispered softly, trying to calm him as he stared straight at Inu, his top Anbu already taking up the assignment as he signaled orders to his men. Naruto's apartment and habitual locations would be searched thoroughly for any clues that could be found. Waving the doctor away, Sarutobi commandeered a stiff back chair, settling himself down with Naruto still crying all over him. The Sandaime took a breath, letting himself sigh as he waited for the boy's hysterics to calm. He shouldn't have been surprised when Naruto's sniffles finally faded into restless sleep, the boy's features scrunched up in discomfort. He considered waking him but in the end decided it'd be best to simply ask the boy tomorrow. He doubted he'd just forget. Suddenly the door opened, revealing Sarutobi's old student, bringing a weary smile to the aging Kage's face. Is he alright? The Sannin asked, stepping into the room and plucking the child out of Sarutobi's arms to place him on the bed, hands raising his shirt to find the seal on his navel. Physically he's fine, but as for what happened to trigger these emotions we cannot say, Sarutobi admitted. Half of me is starting to think this was just one very vivid nightmare. Perhaps I should call this was no nightmare, his student flatly interrupted. That turned Sarutobi's face into hard, chiseled stone, all laxity vanishing at the man's voice. What's wrong? The seal's empty. The Kyuubi's gone, -0. It was 20 minutes later that Sarutobi found himself marching into the bowels of Konoha's interrogation department. Naruto lay blissfully asleep, wheeled through on a hospital bed, kept unconscious by influence of a jinjutsu. This day had gone from routine, to worrying, to downright terrifying, and he needed answers, and he needed them now. Out of a side hallway, Inoichi, half delirious, still waking from whatever sleep his men had dragged him out of, stumbled into view, still visibly trying to get his bearings before Sarutobi grabbed him by the shoulder and all but shoved him towards the direction they were walking. Prepare yourself for a mind walk, the Hokage demanded brusquely. I need to know what he's done. I need to know where he's been, who he's been with, what he's been eating, right down to how many times the boys breathed today. Inoichi, knowing better than to argue, the Yamanaka clan head simply nodded, following the group in his sleepwear. By the time they reached the chamber, Inoichi was fully awake, barely even taking his place at the foot of the bed before he formed his hand seals. 3 seconds later his eyes opened, a bewildered expression decorating his face. What's wrong? His brain? The elder Yamanaka actually seemed to be struggling to find the words. Twisted? What exactly does that mean? It's like, pretend his mind is a stick, straight and thin. You follow it in one direction and leave in one direction. Now toss 100 other sticks, that look and feel the same, but with subtle differences, on top of it, group them together, mix them up and now try to find the exact same stick you had originally. It'll be near impossible. What could do that? I have no idea. Then get an idea. I have a continent's worth of suspects right now and I need that list narrowed. So either think of something or walk in there and find out what happened. I can't do a mind walk like this. I follow the memories then follow them back. Trying to go in here I'd risk just trailing off the path so to speak, in either going forward, or coming back. It could lead to false information, me getting stuck in his subconscious psyche for far longer than would be healthy for either of us. And that's just the better outcomes of a botched mind walk. Whoever you're looking for evidently knows enough about Yamanaka clan techniques to devise this pretty ingenious counter. It's as though someone fabricated an entirely new psyche and drove it into his skull. My suggestion is to look through any records you have regarding people that know mind manipulation techniques, and pray it's not something someone came up with on their own. The professor all but hissed before turning to look at the Anbu to his left. Tell Inu to widen his search parameters to include long-term village residents. This could be a domestic case where someone found access to the Yamanaka clan scrolls. Inoichi gulped, catching the Hokage's eye but not daring to say a single thing. The message was clear. His clan was now under heavy scrutiny as well. If something didn't fall into its place in the investigation, well, he didn't really want to think about that. Just then another of the Anbu had the courtesy to step into the room in full view before approaching the Hokage. So we've discovered something. Speak. The village barrier teams reported an anomaly. Their most sensitive sensor Nin could feel it for an instant. They couldn't identify what it was but investigate further. Cross-reference with patrol groups of Chunin see if anyone reported anything odd last night. At once, Hokage-sama, Inoichi stepped forward. We should tread very carefully with Uzumaki-san. If I'm right and this new fabrication of memories is right on top of his old ones, he could be very confused when he wakes up. That would explain why he attacked one of my Anbu. The Sandame hummed. Soon enough his real memories should prove more formidable than these new fabrications, but until then his behavior might be a little erratic. I suggest when he wakes up you be there, along with some familiar faces if possible. The aging Hokage nodded. I'll see to it, Inoichi. -0 The cage is empty. The massive bars that had loomed over him years ago when he first stepped foot into this place still stand, only they hold vigil over a hollow. There is nothing within. There is only the churning water beneath his feet, the echoes of its sound bouncing off the cold walls. He cannot see Kurama, he cannot hear him, he can't even feel an echo of his presence. His friend is gone without so much as a footprint to have ever indicated he was here. -0 When Naruto opened his eyes the sun was already high in the sky, the light filtering in from the outside world. He pushed himself up to a sitting position, groaning at the stiff soreness in his joints and muscles, rubbing at puffy, tear-crusted eyes as his thoughts tried to organize themselves. He looked down at his two small hands, looked at this room that just seemed too big. He was here, he was alive and he was here, and they were all gone. Why hadn't they told him? Why? He could have tried to push the channeling seals more, refined the displacement matrix, tried to integrate some kind of chakra storage seal into the design. He could have done something. Why didn't they fucking tell him? His hands clenched into tight fists, a white-knuckled grip as his fingers clenched so hard his nails threatened to break the skin, but only threaten. He can't even do that anymore. He sobs. The fury and strength leached out of him, leaving only despair. Not even Kurama, and now he's here, alone again. There's a hand grasping his and Naruto jerks, startled to realize someone had snuck up on him. It had been a while since people could do that. He looks up, expecting to see a nurse only to find a surprising face. Ba-chan, Tsunade, as young and beautiful as ever, frowned. What happened to Tsunade Nineru-chan? Naruto blinked, confused. He'd never known Tsunade when he was a kid, did he? The blonde woman's lips pursed. These memory issues must be pretty bad, she muttered to herself before sitting down on the bed at his feet. What do you remember about me, kiddo? She asked even as her hands glowed with that familiar scanning technique as she hovered her hands over him. You're Tsunade Bar, nay, she nodded. Chocolate Orbs observing him carefully. And you? He paused, noticing something. Hey, where's your necklace? The slug Sanin blinked. My what now? Your necklace? That green jewel. The Shodame's necklace, where is it? I don't have it, so you should. Naruto, that necklace belongs to Dan. You've seen him wearing it forever. Naruto felt himself reeling, straightening on the bed as he stared at her. That Dan guy's alive? Now it was Tsunade whose face seemed to go slack with shock. That Dan, Naruto, he took you and Shizune to see Koyuki Kazuna's latest movie last week. The two sat in mutual disbelief for a moment before Tsunade huffed, resuming her scan. When they find whoever screwed with Yukito, they better give me 10 good minutes alone with them. Naruto sat confused and bewildered. Now he knew something was wrong. Even if Tsunade hadn't left until after he was born, something he highly doubted, and they simply hadn't met before, there was no way that damn guy should still be alive right now. His mind wandered back, trying to recall all that was said when they were designing the seal, wishing, not for the last time, that he could have someone smarter than him that he could talk with. They were supposed to be a team. Could things have changed? Sasuke, Sakura and he spent months talking about all the changes any misstep could bring, but their discussions had only been about changes after the point of their arrival, not before. But could just them coming back in the first place, by itself, change things? It was unnatural. Something like this had never happened before, so trying to theorize about its effects had been something akin to shooting at the sky praying to hit something on the way down. It had been a miracle they got as close as they did. If things had changed, how many, how far, how drastic? How the hell could he prepare for Tobi or Obito or whatever the hell he called himself without his friends, without Kirama, and without even the goddamn security of at least having an idea about what could happen? Naruto, he came back to the waking world with Tsunade hovering over him, his heart pounding in his chest and blood rushing through his ears, the gentle eddies of her healing chakra washing over his small body. What the hell is wrong with you? I have to get out of here, he said, moving to sit up again when Tsunade's hand shoved him back down. You're a 4-year-old kid who all but had a panic attack not 2 feet away from me. You're not going anywhere until you explain what you're thinking about right now. He let out a laugh, a quick bubble of hysteria that threatened to keep going before he reined it in. Explain? Oh yeah, he'll get right on that. Just give him 12 years to get back to the point. They've got to do this again, and he'll jot down all his notes for her. He laughed a little more. Tsunade's face showed genuine concern. Come on kid, stop. You're really scaring me now. That sobered him up, but the lack of illogical euphoria left him only with the crushing anxiety of this whole debacle. I'm sorry Nei-chan, -0 we found nothing that's not like you, Inu. Do you need another 24 hours? There is nothing, Hokage-sama, Inu assured. He spoke to no one unusual. The toxicology reports came back negative. Hyruga have looked over his chakra network to check for any recent manipulations. All visitors within the last week have checked out. Everyone he spoke to checked out. The only lead we have to go on is that minor barrier fluctuation, and no one in the core knows what that could be. I cannot ask you to stop searching, I understand. I'm just informing you that at this stage, the likelihood of us finding anything is nearly negligible. Just do everything possible. Leave nothing unturned. In the meantime, I want you to devote yourself and your best Anbu to guard Naruto at all times until further notice. You'll work in shifts. The rest of your men will hunt down a list of all possible mind manipulators outside of Konoha. Someone on this continent knows something. Understood? Inu vanished in a swirl of leaves. You're pushing him hard, the Sandame's second and remaining student commented with a grin as he stepped out of a nearby wall with a smirk. Sarutobi kept walking, approaching the door. There has to be an explanation. If not, they managed to infiltrate every layer of our village defenses completely undetected. Even I would have trouble to do something like that, and I designed the system. -0 Her eyes moved to the door for a second, and it was enough to warn Naruto that someone else was coming a second before the door opened. Not they managed to infiltrate every layer of our village defenses completely undetected. Even I would have trouble to do something like that, and I designed the system, the Sandame said to someone before stepping into the room, smiling gently at the boy on the bed. Naruto-chan. Naruto smiled, genuine relief filling his face at something wholly familiar and long missed. Jiji. Then the smile dropped from his face, the fear gripping him as the unmistakable form of the snake Sanin stepped through the doorways, a gentle little smile tugging at his own features. Hello Naruto-kun. It didn't take Inoichi to see the sudden tension that gripped the boy, and it was Tsunade that spoke. Naruto, you remember Oro-kun, don't you? Naruto licked his lips, swallowing as he nodded, still glaring at the man. I do. Tsunade frowned, turning to look over her shoulder. These memory issues seem to range, and whoever did this was really good. Other than his hostility to me, what other odd behavior has he shown? The snake Sanin questioned, crossing his arms with one hand on his chin, curious. He thought Dan was dead, seems to have completely forgotten about him, like he never even existed for the last 4 years. That made the snake Sanin raise a slender eyebrow. Tsunade nodded. My reaction too. The only one whose memory seems to be unaltered is Sensei. Even that might not be true on further inquiry. Be glad, Sensei, your enemies haven't stooped so low as to turn the aggression of a toddler on you. Sarutobi gave a short chuckle from somewhere in his throat. Okay, look, Naruto said, scratching at his head in frustration. I remember Ero Senin, so let's just bring him here too. Ero who now? Tsunade glared. Jiraiya. Immediately, Naruto knew something was wrong. All 3 of the room's occupants went stiff with shock. Tsunade went pale, and even Orochimaru seemed as though he'd just been sucker punched. Naruto, Sarutobi began, choking on the words. Jiraiya has been dead for almost 20 years. He was dead. dead, killing Hattori Hanzo, the true shinobi of Ame and the last Toad Sage, cut each other down in the final days of the last Great War. He'd asked how, but neither Tsunade nor Orochi team seemed to be willing to cough up information, so he'd gone to the library hoping to find something on public record. He found very little, the bare bones of a romanticized account that depicted the old pervert fighting Hanzo to the end in order to defend his injured teammates. In the end they managed to kill each other. If he didn't know any better, he'd say the old bastard wrote it himself. He sniffed, closing the book with a snap before pushing it aside. Shinobi records were sealed, and public records sucked. They didn't say how he died, what techniques were used. They didn't even say where the man was buried. He pulled closer another book, this one on history. He needed to find out just how many things stayed the same and how far this ripple effect thing went. -0 Jiraiya, calm down, you fucking calm down, she screeched, still pacing the length of the Sarutobi's office. Someone's stuck. How the hell did they just shut up? The snake Sanin barked, his own agitation shining through. Let's stop and think before you bust down 10 walls with no purpose and actually make use of this. Indeed, Sarutobi agreed, stepping into his office, a file under his arm. Naruto-chan's revelation narrows down our list of suspects considerably. Anyone who was close enough to Jiraiya to know his personality and appearance, the snake surmised. Exactly. He opened the file as he sat down. That almost certainly means a domestic enemy. We'll look into it, Tsunade assured, her clenched fists cracking as she tightened her grip. Saru would pity whomever they eventually tracked down, if he didn't feel exactly the same way. To use Jiraiya to twist a boy's memories and simultaneously betray the village, this person, whoever he or she was, had gained 3 very powerful enemies. I'll be making some inquiries into my spies from Ame. In the meanwhile, Orochimaru nodded. Many of their countrymen still hold a great hatred for what Jiraiya did and could have strove to do something like this. Do it. Even if you run a dead end, we've been too lax on AIM's activities recently. We need more intel. Either way, I'll make my next statement to both of you. In your mutual investigations, do not forget about Naruto himself. He'll need our help after what he's experienced, and I can't be there as often as I'd like. You two were always close with him. Have faith that he'll remember that soon. Tsunade nodded. Yeah, I'll bring Dan to see him when he gets back. Maybe that'll jog something. Orochimaru smirked. He might throw one of his toy kunai at me if I get too close. Getting scared of a toddler, Oro-kun? The female in the room laughed. Terrified, he quipped, smiling for a moment before becoming serious again. Don't worry, sensei, the boy's strong for his age. He'll be fine. In a few days he'll be right back to normal. I hope so, the old monkey confessed as he lit his pipe. Then he waved them both away. Go. You have your orders. -0 Teichou. Inu's head turned ever so slightly, finding the new arrival through the slit eye holes of his mask. You're here early. Before I assume my duties, it would be best if I were fully briefed on the situation, she said, kneeling beside him, assuming a perch on the tall library bookshelf to look down at the 4-year-old child. He's suffering memory issues, and we might be seeing the first ramifications of it. How so? She asked. When was the last time you saw a 4-year-old reading through history books in the library? Furthermore, he's comprehending. Evidently, the experience of these false memories might have given him an increased intelligence. Our experiences shape us, she affirmed, adding experiences, even false ones, must have affected him. Inu nodded, then leaned a little forward. Looks like he found something that doesn't really match up with what he knew. The blonde boy picked up the heavy book, struggling with its weight as he all but ran towards the librarian's desk. -0 Is this right? Naruto all but shouted, pushing the book up onto the desk, startling the elderly man sitting by a piece of furniture. The older man blinked, pushing his thick reading glasses onto the bridge of his nose, leaning forward and taking the book in hand. Which part, young man? Naruto marched around the desk, pushing through the swiveling doors to stand next to the man as he brought the book down to his eye level. He pointed a little finger, pressing it against a paragraph. This part right here. The man brought the book close to his face, reading over the identified paragraph. After a moment the man nodded. Yes, it is. What seems to be the problem? Naruto swallowed, smiling after a moment as he held out his hand to take back the book. Nothing, just wanted to make sure. The old man nodded, handing the book back. -0 Inu's head tilted. Wonder what he found that's so interesting. The woman beside him shrugged. We can find out later, he nodded, his body beginning to vanish into wisps of smoke. I'll leave to get some rest. Be seeing you. She set herself onto a more comfortable position, watching as the little blonde sat down once again in his previous seat. -0 Naruto meanwhile smiled as he sat down, reading over the paragraph once again just for that smile to stay on his face. It was Hashirama Senju and Uchiha Madara that founded Konoha, allying the powerful Senju and Uchiha clans and uniting the clans that were based around the continent's central region. While their respective Makuden and Sharingan bloodlines were extremely powerful, It does not appear at this time that any of their descendants have inherited their Keki Genkei, an Uchiha clan without the Sharingan. It was no guarantee Toby hadn't manifested the thing or stolen it, but this had the potential to make things far less complicated. He kept on reading -0. It was night when he finally stepped out of the library's halls, shivering in the cold evening air, regretting the fact that he hadn't brought a jacket with him. Suddenly he felt a weight settle on his shoulders, stumbling forward a little as it settled before he looked to see someone had placed a thick, orange coat over his shoulders. He looked to thank whoever it was when the words died on his lips, replaced by a frown and a glare. Orochimaru raised a slender eyebrow. "Should I assume you don't like this coat anymore?" he asked, a note of glibness in his tone. "What are you doing here? When I heard you were out here without a coat, I was behoved to bring one to you." Naruto blinked. Behoved by who? Tsunade, of course. He pointed and Naruto turned to look, finding a slug resting on the branch of a nearby tree. "She's busy at the hospital, or she would have come herself," he commented. "Come, I'll walk you home and you can answer some of my questions, one of which being how you know what behove means." "No thanks," Naruto said, turning to walk the long way home. Snakes slithered around his waist, coiling tightly and lifting, leaving his little legs dangling in the air. "I insist, let's talk, you and I," the snake drawled, pulling him up to his side as he marched down the road. The youth struggled, hands pulling and pushing at the snakes, but with the limbs of a 4-year-old he might as well have been trying to bend steel. "So what did they stick in your head that's gotten you so riled up about me, Naruto-kun?" he asked, as though commenting on the encroaching winter. "You're a creepy bastard, that's what. Let me out of this." "Evidently they also taught you some more colorful words to go along with behove to your limited repertoire. All right then, let's not talk about me. What fabrications did they stick in your head about Jiraiya? What's it matter to you anyway?" Naruto glowered, arms crossed now, having given up on freeing himself. "Don't pretend like you gave a da." Orochimaru stopped, standing still in the road as he turned to look at Naruto, the serpentine yellow eyes boring a hole into the boy's skull. "Naruto-kun, you're young and confused. You can count that as your saving grace, or you'd be in a great deal of pain right now." The blonde met the serpent's gaze, blinking in curious bewilderment. Orochimaru turned and kept on walking, waiting for a moment before speaking again. "Now tell me, what was it they stuck in that head of yours about Jiraiya?" Naruto looked down, considering whether he should answer or not. Finally, he did speak. "Ero Sennin was always peeping on girls in the hot springs." "Ha!" The snake barked out a laugh. "That does sound like him. What did he look like in these memories of yours?" "Big, taller than anyone else in the village, except maybe Chaoji's dad Chaoji. Akimichi, white hair that he could make into a personal shield. Dressed up like a kabuki, with sandals and everything." A smirk graced the pale man's face, one born of seemingly fond remembrance. "He was also the first one that taught me the water walking and summoning." Orochimaru stopped again, turning to look at him. "Taught you? You learned how to manipulate chakra?" That made Naruto pause, hesitating for a moment before his mind came to a hasty decision, a quick plan forming in his head as he deduced where this could lead. "Yeah." The snake set him down, uncoiling from his waist. "Show me," the man demanded. With a thought, Naruto pushed chakra to his feet. -0. Seeing that her charge was in the safe hands of Konoha's snake summoner, the young woman that had been tailing them pulled away, doubling back towards the librarian, who was beginning to gather his things as she approached, making as much noise as possible so as to not give the man a heart attack. When he looked up, he was visibly startled to see one of Konoha's normally unseen special operators standing in front of him. "The boy who was here, he asked you about a book. What was he inquiring about?" -0. Naruto struggled to focus, his underdeveloped coils trying to adapt to this new strain he was putting on them. He raised up his foot, about to place it on the wall before the Sanin's voice stopped him. "You're using too much. This is what I always used," he protested, putting his foot down. "Your memories are on the right track, but your body doesn't know what it's doing." He shot back, placing a hand on his chin. "Still, this is interesting. You mentioned summoning. Show me the seals." And Naruto formed them, watching Orochimaru's curious face as he did. The Sanin knelt, getting himself at eye level with the youth, pulling out a kunai from his pouch and offering it hilt first. "How well can you throw one of these?" Naruto grinned, and Orochimaru could tell it was false. The boy was manipulating him, or trying to, failing miserably, but the effort was there. "How about you and I make a deal?" he asked. The snake raised a slender eyebrow. He had a feeling he knew where this was going. -0. It was the next morning that Sarutobi found himself in his office, reading over a series of files discussing a zoning dispute between the Hyuga and the Akimichi clans when the door to his office opened, revealing his pale-skinned student. "Orochimaru, what can I do for you?" Not mincing words, the man smirked in that familiar way of his. "I'm here to nominate Uzumaki Naruto for early academy enrollment." Officially, nominating a child for early academy enrollment was not, in truth, that big of a deal. The child had been discovered to possess a high degree of proficiency, or raw talent in one or various shinobi arts and, as a military state, the village policy was to hone these abilities early so as not to let them go to waste or be lost due to a normal civilian life being unable to nurse these prodigious talents adequately. Unofficially, Naruto was discovering, it was like painting a neon sign over the kid's head. He should have guessed really. The two people he knew about from his time period that had gotten an early nomination were Kakashi-sensei and Itachi, and both were comparable monsters when measured against the run-of-the-mill shinobi. It wasn't done often. Not only was it difficult to find a child with actual talent beyond mere hopes and dreams, but the person that nominated them risked a lot of his own reputation prestige. If the nominee turned out to be average or worse yet, subpar, or even injured in the tests of the academy, then that person was branded, at the bare minimum, reckless. Both Itachi and Kakashi had been nominated by members of their own families, but he, the resident Jinchuriki, being nominated by the recluse that was the Snake Sanin, had come, as far as most could tell, completely out of left field and made a lot of civilians and quite a few shinobi curious, and rumors were already starting to float around, none of which were true. Naruto wouldn't trust that serpent as far as he could throw him, which in his present state wasn't very far at all. The only reason he'd chosen him over the others was because, well, he was there, and now he was in a rush. He had to start climbing the shinobi ladder early. The higher his rank, the more techniques he'd have access to, the more doors he'd be able to open, the more clearance he'd have. More clearance meant more information, and he needed information. That was the key to finding Toby. He only knew the vaguest of Toby's acts before the war had broken out. It hadn't mattered to him where the hell the Uchiha had come from, only what he could do to stop him. And by the time their little plan of going back in time saw itself pushed from the aspect of pipe dream to necessity, anyone that could have possibly answered such questions were long since dead or enemies, or both. And more than that, he needed to get to Toby before he managed to achieve the insane level of strength he'd gotten during the war. He needed to warn the Jinchuriki about him and maybe Akatsuki too if they still existed. He finished off his breakfast, tossing the dish in the sink, promising to clean it out later, before he made for the door, ready to leave when he heard a knock. He paused, blinking, wondering who it would be as he reached for the kunai and shuriken pouches to strap them on. They'd been given to him, courtesy of Sarutobi. "Be right there, old man." The door opened, no doubt picked with chakra. "I'm not that old, kiddo." The voice was unfamiliar, and Naruto quickly looked up, finding a smiling silver-haired man. Who are you?" The man's face fell. "Whoa, Su-chan warned me, but that's a real kick to the gut, kiddo." "It's me, Dan." Naruto blinked. So this the one Tsunade had been so hung up on. "I thought you'd be taller," the blonde found himself saying before thinking. "Me too," he shot back with an easy grin. "But alas, humans don't grow on hopes and dreams. Which reminds me, have you been eating fruits and vegetables like Su-chan told you last time we were here? I guess. You have that refrigerator stuffed with ramen, don't you? There's cereal in there." He defended -0. Dan walked him to the academy. It was a novel experience. And no, that wasn't a euphemism. It was actually a novel experience. He'd never had someone walk him to the academy grounds. The Hokage occasionally saw him before he left his apartment when he could spare the time, but those times were few and far between, and even then he had to head to the tower, not to the academy, which was a bit out of the way from his destination. So having someone walk him the whole way, there was a real change of pace, and the company was actually nice to boot. It didn't take him long to realize Dan was a joker. He always had a ready comeback or witty comment. It kinda reminded him of Jiraiya, though Ero-sen intended to be more dry sarcasm than witty quips. "Are my two princesses," the silver-haired man said, drawing Naruto's attention enough for him to find Tsunade and a much younger Shizune. "But I really am sick." "Oh, bull to the shit," the slug princess shot back. "You just don't wanna go on the first day. We never do anything on the first day. You get to say hi to all those wonderful people you'll be spending the rest of the year with." "I say hi to them all the time anyway. It's not like we can lose each other inside this village." "You get to say hi to the teachers then." "I don't want to say hi to the teachers. That's half the objective here." "Tough luck then." He didn't remember Shizune Nichan talking back to Tsunade, ever, even when she deserved it. Now Shi-chan, you wouldn't want to leave Naruto here alone on his first day, would you? What about all those voracious little aspiring kunoichi he'll have to contend with?" Dan's voice announced their arrival to Shizune, who turned around with a smirk for both of them. "Hey Uncle Dan." "Hi Neru-chan." Her smile fell a bit when she noticed his sad face. What's wrong?" Naruto blinked for a moment, staring at her face, and struggled to push away the memory of her eyes open in death, of red blood staining her pale skin, at those same eyes staring back at him from the opposite side of a battlefield. He smiled as brightly as he could, greeting this expression like an old friend, one he hadn't seen or needed in a long time. "Hey Shizune Nichan." He stepped forward and hugged her, barely reaching her waist as she patted his hair. A lump formed in his throat at the familiar gesture. Those kunoichi will have to deal with me before Shizune gets a crack at them, he heard Tsunade vow, and heard the swat of her hand against Dan's arm. And don't you go sticking ideas in his head either, the man chuckled. Naruto let go of Shizune before the hug became awkward, looking up at the building. Was Iruka-sensei here yet? Or, was that not going to happen at all? It had been so long since he'd come around here. It had been so long since this place was around to come to. He felt a hand on his shoulder, turning to see Tsunade standing beside him, a serious frown on her face. You okay, kiddo? Once more he smiled. Yeah, just nervous. Tsunade's frown grew a little deeper. You can wait, you know. I'll talk things over with Oro-kun. And no, he interrupted, his voice pitching with the high notes of a 4-year-old. No, I can do it. We know you can. This voice was familiar, and as far as he was concerned, still and welcome. The whole group turned to find Orochimaru standing not 5 feet away, seemingly conjuring himself from thin air, smiling with that serpentine upturn of his lips. Have a little faith, Tsu-chan, he drawled. I wouldn't have nominated little Neru-chan if I didn't know he could handle it. He might be able to handle it, but that doesn't mean he needs to. He's 4, and Naruto could tell as the Sannin shrugged that this was simply retracing the steps of an argument the two had held previously. They were Sannin, so neither of them would budge, one way or the other. Orochimaru looked to him, his smirk becoming a little wider. True, but it is his choice and, you and I can both see that he'll choose to go. Every time, -0 Shizune wasn't in his class. He wasn't surprised. It was a 4-year program. Children entered when they were 6 or 8, took on the program for 4 years, graduated and became genin. Shizune was on her last semester. He'd gotten in when he was 6, being an orphan with no income outside of village-funded programs and a trust fund left to the Hokage. He'd been eligible for the early enrollment. It was a village hashtag to give orphan children the head start of becoming shinobi and getting paid as early as possible. A surefire way to keep themselves from starving. In reality, it was the easiest source of new recruits considering how many orphans a military village had. He'd failed the graduation exam twice and managed to get in on his 3rd, which is why his classmates in genin team had been with people his own age. This time though, he was starting absurdly early. The only person that had managed to get in this early was Hatake Kakashi, and he was so good he'd managed to graduate in a single year. Getting on a team at age 5, from what he could recall, the only one that could match that was Itachi, and even he had gotten in at age 6 and graduated at age 7. Hopefully, he'd be able to match Kakashi's little feat. The way he saw it, if he could graduate by 5, become a genin, he could be a chunin as early as 6 years old, and start training for the jounin trials to take them at 8 or 9. With that rank it would be enough to wiggle himself into some of the village vaults to get access to techniques that would let him join the Hunter Nin squad by the time he hit 12, which is when things should start kicking into the proverbial high gear. The Hunter Nins were the elite of the elite, the best any village had to offer. They were the ninja, meant to kill other ninja on a daily basis. Konoha, at the height of its power, held somewhere around 100 genin, 350 to 500 chunin, about 150 to 200 jounin and 70 to 100 anbu, but they only ever had 20 hunter ninja. The reason for this was twofold. Firstly because they were just that strong, and secondly because a hunter ninja's loyalty must be absolutely beyond question, given that they had to go on the most high-risk missions, tracking down and killing other ninja, some of these A or even S-class targets, to bring in that money to the village coffers when they killed ninja from other villages that had posted the bounty. These ninja could be, and were in fact authorized to be gone for months at a time, which would suit him perfectly. With this plan, he wouldn't meet his friends, not until much later at any rate, as it was he was staying as far away from Sasuke and Sakura as possible, avoiding anything that might change them. He wanted them as close to what they were as he could get, so he wouldn't meet them, any of them, but he had to do this. The kind of freedom the Hunter Nin enjoyed was exactly what he needed to contact all the other Jinchuriki, get a bead on Akatsuki and kill Tobi. This was the plan, now he just had to make it happen. Alright kids, settle down. The teacher marched in, an older man with a salt and pepper hair and beard that kinda reminded him of Asuma sensei's, only it went around his mouth too. Some of you may notice we've gotten a new student. I'd like you all to give a warm welcome to Naruto-san here. He'll be with us for the next few years, we hope. Just one buddy. The blonde smiled, waving at a bunch of faces he didn't recognize. Nice to meet cha. Alright class, I'll be passing you your class schedules and programs. Each of you, for the next class, must have read and at least be able to discuss the general theory behind the basic arts of shinobi combat. As Naruto took his paper, droning out the teacher, he read over the subjects, reassigning his own time period for mastering and learning these assignments. -0 The Sharingan, you say? Sarutobi mused, not even looking up from his file, the stench of tobacco wafting up from his pipe to permeate the room. Or the Makuden? The Kunoichi replied. He looked into the book last week, and since then his interest in both bloodlines has only increased. There aren't many public works on it, given how few ever faced either abilities and survived, but he's digging them up, like he's looking for something specific. I wonder what that boy's getting himself up to. Why would a 4-year-old be so interested in the abilities of our late founders? I don't know, though for now, his interest seems to be little more than a passing fancy. I just thought you should know, Hokage-sama. Sarutobi nodded. Good, keep me appraised of anything more you find odd. The more information we have, the easier it may be for Inoichi to treat him should it ever be necessary. Understood. So the young woman turned, leaving Sarutobi to his files for the time being. -0 by the time the academy was over. Naruto was anxious to get back to his apartment in order to start the long road of getting his body back into some kind of shape. He'd gotten tired from running up and down stairs. True, for his 4-year-old self these stairs were about the equivalent to some tall sets of bleachers or something that he really had to lift his leg to get up over it, but still, freaking stairs. He needed to get back into shape and quick. He moved to step out the door when he felt something tugging at his collar, holding him back from leaving. Surprised, he paused, turning to look over his shoulder to see young Shizune holding on to him. Where do you think you're going, Neru-chan? Home. Why was she glaring at him? No. It's your first day, that means you have to go get the school IDs. I knew you'd forget, that's why I came down here. Yeah, can I do that tomorrow? I'm kinda tired, Shizune. Nay, you should really get it today, she begrudged. That thing's important and tells everyone you're a member of the academy to be allowed on school grounds. Without it some of the guards might not let you in if they think you're trying to spy on Konoha teaching methods. He struggled not to snicker. Is that what they all thought when they were kids? Yeah, it kinda had been. Spying on the academy? Any spy that came back with the important Konoha Academy teaching curriculum would probably get stabbed for incompetence. It was a tab on all prospective shinobi so that strategists and mathematicians like Shika could properly determine Konoha's potential military growth based on statistical analysis, along with the academy passing average. If numbers weren't up to snuff, or if the genin were coming out below standards, those IDs and school records would be the first piece of evidence to be gathered. Really, I promise I'll get it tomorrow, Nei-chan. Alright, she sighed before she reached around and coiled her arm over his shoulder to ruffle his hair. Come on, let's get something to eat, then I'll walk you home. He didn't want to waste time. He wanted to get the ball rolling, and the faster he did that the better. But you never really know when the next time or rain check really will be the last one. He'd learned that one the hard way. He smiled, the warm display as pleasant as ever as he looked at this younger little stranger. Sounds great. If there's one thing Naruto knew, it was that the Hokage had people watching him. Most of the time it was for his own protection. This time it was for both his protection and to keep an eye on any odd developments he might demonstrate after the incident, as Tsunade and Dan had taken to calling it. One thing he couldn't afford was Gigi getting suspicious of him. It would cause him to waste too much time and would make things all sorts of complicated. Too complicated. So, obviously, he needed a place to get away from the prying eyes for a bit. Somewhere he could give his Anbu guards, wherever they were, the proverbial slip for a few minutes. And this place was none other than his own bathroom. It was the one place that none of his guards followed him. Not only was it in the middle of the apartment, so no one could really get in without walking through the walls and giving away their infiltration through the chakra spikes such a technique would require. But there was the more obvious issue of privacy. In a village full of people that could turn invisible, teleport, see through walls and find 1,000,001 other ways to spy on you without being seen, it was almost an unwritten rule even without the hang-ups of basic human decency. One Ero Senin hadn't applied to the onsens in his own little version of the rulebook, but, to digress, he was now in his bathroom, doing something he was probably better at by this point, than breathing and walking at the same time. Seals. He was rapidly discovering that no matter how much he pushed himself, there's only so much a 4-year-old body is capable of. At the very best, he would barely be able to take on a seasoned genin at this point. He was just too small. He didn't have enough power behind his limbs to throw a kunai, or shuriken at blinding speed, or punch someone unconscious. A full-on adult civilian could take his blows with relative ease, and his chakra reserves were nowhere near where they were when he graduated the first time, so even his ninjutsu arsenal was limited. He was good enough to pass the academy, that was for damn sure, but not much beyond that. But if there was one thing he could still do, it was seals, and seals were more useful than people gave them credit for. He wasn't gonna do a lot, that would draw way too much attention. He wouldn't even do something that would be visible for a while. He was gonna start to condition his body for nature chakra. Nature chakra was a potent, powerful force no matter who wielded it. It wasn't on par with the power he'd wielded when he and Kurama were of one mind, nothing ever would be. But it was a weapon he still had available to him, one that when mastered, was damn near unstoppable. The problem with nature chakra, of course, was its inherent risk. You turned to stone. As a rule, you needed massive reserves of human chakra to even attempt the technique, which was why it was so little known. Few ninja ever managed to have that much chakra, and those that did had other weapons in their arsenal that made this little-known hermit technique seem like a waste, especially given the amount of control needed, something that people of such reserves didn't necessarily have in the first place. When one first started training with nature chakra, that was the most dangerous part. Nature was everywhere, all around the person, so the moment one opened themselves up to that power, it was like opening a pair of massive floodgates, and the whitewash is what normally took people completely by surprise and turned them to stone. The key was learning how to open those floodgates just enough so as to allow the body's own natural human chakra to water it down just right. Too thick and you're half an animal, too thin and it's not having any effect. There was no way he was gonna risk turning to a stone statue in the middle of his bathroom before he could even start getting ready for Toby. He didn't have the chakra, he didn't have that stick to whack himself on the head, he didn't have anything. All he had was a little seal that would act as a sieve, one that would slowly trickle little droplets of that chakra into his system every day. There was no guarantee it would have any long-term effects, but at this stage, until time could bring about its natural changes, he would hold out hope that this thing would give him a bit of an edge when it was time to learn to do it properly. He traveled through time on more far-fetched hopes. He finished with a bit of a flourish, blowing lightly on the ink that now decorated his shin to dry it. Few people would look there. It was only a few seconds before he felt that familiar, welcome friend coursing through his veins again. Lowering the leg of his pants back down, he flushed the toilet to finish the theatrics show before stepping out into the hallway ready to get some sleep. He was gonna meet his last teacher tomorrow minus 07 months. In 7 months the boy had burned away clear through the academy's curriculum, passing every test ever placed in front of him with flying colors. It was only written exams that seemed to give him any pause, but tests of strength, skill and stealth, especially stealth, he seemed to push right through them as though he should be teaching the instructor. There had only ever been a handful of exceptional academy students like this, the prodigal scion of the Uchiha clan heads being the most recent. Hatake Kakashi was the one before him, driven to such lengths by his own intense drive to be better than his father, who had brought shame to the prestige of the Hatake clan name. Tsukumo himself was another exceptional student, but it had only been expected. The Hatake clan was one of the last to join the village system, the last vanguard of the old way, the times of endless, unremitting war. Compared to that, the academy was probably a relaxing warm-up exercise. There were a few others that had managed to demonstrate well enough aptitude to push through the academy in quick succession. Nothing nearly as exceptional as a single year, but in 2, or so, give or take a month. But one thing Orochimaru knew was that each one of these people that pushed themselves so hard had one thing in common, a drive. They were driven to such extremes. It wasn't by choice, it wasn't by mere happenstance. They pushed themselves because something made them believe that they had to do this, that they had something to prove, or accomplish. With the Uchiha it had been a wish to get away from the clan. Fugaku was a strict disciplinarian even by clan standards. The young prodigy had sought the freedom of a genin team, of missions that would extend their reach beyond the walls of Konoha. The Uchiha had wanted an escape. Hatake had wanted to outrun the memory of his father. Tsukumo had wanted to drive himself into the heart of Konoha and plant his clan's proverbial flag as to declare that even though he was not a founder of this village, none would look down or attempt to usurp the prestige of the Hatake clan that had beaten back both the Senju and Uchihas many times over the years. But, for the life of him, he could not determine what it was that drove Naruto, and something was indeed driving him. He stayed up all night studying ninjutsu scrolls, reading history books, sharpening his kunai training. It was more than one occasion where Orochimaru and the Anbu guarding him felt compelled to put him to sleep with a jinjutsu, ones that, every day were getting increasingly more difficult to pull off. It would be years before he could, in actuality, shrug off one of his sleeping illusions, of course. But the fact that he was able to not only detect, but offer at least a token resistance was remarkable. He was no slacker when it came to the subtle art of jinjutsu, but still, the driving force behind Naruto's sheer desperation in passing through this process as quickly as possible, or to be as strong as possible, was one that he simply could not discern. Not only that, but the ever-present hostility he harbored towards him had not abated in the slightest. All his defenses came up like an iron wall whenever he even heard the Sanin's voice, coming from a child, whose first impression was a toothless smile and a grubby, drool-covered hand reaching for his hair, who with a giggle finally tugged on it hard enough to make him wince. It was a startling change for him to witness. In truth, he was somewhat bothered by it, mostly because he knew just how easy such a look could grace many features. He'd killed a lot of people, most sensei knew about, and if he didn't, Tsunade did. But what he did in his professional life for the sake of the village, and worse, for his own ambitions, had taken him to dark places, places he may not have crawled out of in one piece had it not been for key moments that had pulled him back from the precipice of oblivion he'd been standing on at points in his life. If Naruto ever knew about those, then it would be very easy for him to look at him with those eyes. Easy for him, for sensei, for a lot of people that halfway mattered. And that did bother him in several ways, not the least of which was that whomever had altered Naruto's memories might have at least an inkling, and to give those memories to a boy, who's to say he or she couldn't just go blathering on to everyone. That worried him. Still, they didn't know, for now at least, and he was grateful for that. He picked up a file, one that was steadily growing in size since he started it 7 months ago, pulling free the pad in order to jot down the notes of this last week's subject demonstrating remarkable aptitude for the academy stealth exercises. 0 Neru-chan. The second he walked into the class, he heard Shizune's voice, finding her at the top row, seated next to a handful of other students. He smiled, waving, and smiling a little more when he realized she had reserved a seat for him. Marching up, he laughed as she ruffled his hair. "This is totally unfair, you know," she bemoaned. "I gotta sit here for 4 years and you just up and get through this thing in less than 1. I'm just awesome that way," he replied, showing off those pearly whites as he took his seat. "Yeah, well, we'll see how well you handle Z-sensei. She's the toughest teacher here." "You're right," Naruto scoffed. "She can't be on my case any more than Iruka-sensei was when I was here." Shizune offered a shrug, her face saying just how confident she was in the fact that Naruto would be eating those words. "That him?" The voice brought Naruto's eyes to the other side of his adopted sister, looking at a rather scruffy-looking Inuzuka kid. No jacket like Kiba, a bit thinner. Then he remembered Kiba being too, though, come to think of it, that could have been the jacket. His dog was definitely a sight bigger than a Kamaru had been, reaching the kid's knee already, whereas a Kamaru had been small enough to prop on Kiba's head. He squinted at the 4-year-old. "He don't look so tough," Shizune smacked him on the shoulder. "He's 4. What the hell did you expect?" Sticking his tongue out and making a face, Naruto let some of his natural immaturity shine through as he joined the rebuke in his own way, out of sight of Shizune of course. "He's supposed to be taller, and you're supposed to be smarter," she deadpanned. Naruto helped by continuing to make faces. Before anything more could be said, the doors opened. "Sit down, all of you." The words weren't shouted, they were barely even heard all the way up top where he, Shizune and some of the other students were sitting, but never in his life had Naruto ever heard a room go as quiet as a crypt as fast as this room had. Every student sat in their chairs like they were falling into a regiment's formation. The woman that marched into the room was not what Naruto was expecting. She had something akin to a bowl-cut hairstyle, like Guy or Lee, only long enough to reach down to her neck, chocolate brown hair, wrinkles that were as carved into her skin as Sarujiji's, and the most distinguishing feature of all, she's practically shorter than me. He hadn't realized that he'd spoken out loud until the room, as quiet as it was, seemed to grow even quieter somehow, and every eye swiveled around to look at him. How this was accomplished without anyone moving a muscle he'd never know. Z, as he remembered her name, didn't seem to let it affect her at all as she marched up towards her desk, speaking. "It seems they taught you a good grasp of the obvious in the lower academy tiers, Uzumaki. Now let's see if we can teach you something a little above the level of potty training." It was a joke, one that pissed him off, but that he knew quite a few people would have been laughing at. Hell, he'd be laughing at it, if he wasn't the victim, that is. So why couldn't he even hear a snicker? He couldn't hear or see any movement. In fact, the only thing moving in the room, unseen to all, was Inu, who winced in his hiding spot, remembering just what it was to take class with this woman. "Well, now that our introductions are all finished, we'll all be heading outside for some weapons practice." Now the class started moving, smiles flitting about here and there at the prospect of abandoning these books for a little while, smiles that were quickly wiped clean. "But before we get to that boring old stuff, we'll have a fun little pop quiz to get those minds working. Doesn't that sound nice?" Z chirped with the most pleasant smile you could ever see on someone's face. The groans seemed to feed that smile. Naruto could somehow tell this was going to be a very miserable 3 months minus 0 at the end of the day, as they were all getting ready to head on home. Z Sensei's voice cut through the classroom chatter as easily as it had at the start of the day. "Mr. Uzumaki, please stay here for a moment. I'd rather speak to you in private." Shizune threw him an apologetic look, but he smiled and waved anyway. What was the worst a teacher could do to him, really? He sat and waited. Student after student filed out as Z-sensei gathered her own things, getting ready to leave herself. Finally, as the last of the students left, "Sorry I called you short," he said. "You didn't call me short. You called yourself short while comparing my height to yours." "And there is a difference," she replied, finishing gathering her things before she grabbed her papers and walked up to him. She stared at him for a second or two before she pulled her glasses free from the bridge of her nose and wiped at them. "Now, I'm going to give you the same speech I've given to more students than I should have since I've been teaching here, and I expect you'll, in the end, prove as stubborn as they were and give me roughly the same answer and quietly mutter about how I don't know what I'm talking about but holding out on a prayer. Here goes nothing. Might be, you're the first surprised. How about you go out and play for a few more years, Naruto blinked. The question, put so strangely, caught him a little flat, making him answer the first thing that came to mind. There's no time for that. Now. That's a curious answer, because now is the time for it. Later is when there won't be time. You're 4 years old, you shouldn't be in here training how to slice open a man's neck. But out there she looked like she was about to go on something of a tangent when he interrupted. I'm not quitting. He appreciated the thought, really. But she just didn't understand. No one would understand that he really didn't have any time. Every second was precious. She made a bit of a face, half exasperated, half resigned. Well, at least you don't seem as stiff and boring as the last two of you that came through here. We'll see each other tomorrow then. Naruto nodded, hopping down from his seat to walk out of the class. Z waited for him to leave before turning her eyes to the side, peering into a corner of the room. Kakashi, she could almost feel said corner stiffen. Be a dear and do your old academy sensei a favor. Could you get in contact with Oro-kun and tell him to get in touch? He never writes anymore. There was silence for a moment before the corner spoke. How the hell do you do that? She smiled. Because my dear, no matter how old you get you never forget the basics. She began to leave. I'm not boring, you know. It was 3 weeks before he actually started feeling the first of the effects. He should have expected this, really. It was one of the most significant benefits of using nature chakra in the first place. You could detect everybody. It'd be weird if he didn't remember what it was to feel the full effect of nature chakra coursing through his veins. I mean, in his perfected sage mode he could practically feel the fly that landed on the leaf 100 yards away. He was in tune with nature, and that really didn't have a limit. Here and now he could feel some of the chakra signatures around the village. Just a handful for now. The strongest were the ones that stood out the most. Tsunade recognized immediately. Saru Jiji, he had to wait till the old man had gotten to his office and stayed there for a while. He found his Anbu too. She seemed somewhat familiar, so he probably had sensed her somewhere specific during the war, but his memory just wasn't being jogged. Maybe she'd guarded him back in his original time or something. As he made his way to the academy, he kept on trying to make use of this new little development, sensing the different people here and there and trying to recognize them. Later, with some practice, he'd make a point of pegging the chakra signatures of all the ones that were important to him. That way he could find them no matter what. It was as he was thinking this, that he felt his Anbu escort with the familiar signature suddenly fall back and start turning away. It was a mystery as to why that was when his senses found another signature, this one suppressed, but quickly becoming more apparent to his newfound sixth sense as it edged closer. It made him smile. At least one of his old sensei were okay. -0. Alright, everyone settle down. Z raised her voice as the students all but stampeded out of the academy building into the adjacent training grounds. Nothing, not even she, could ever keep a class of academy students' excitement completely suppressed when it came time for taijutsu matches. It was a practice reserved for the 4th year students about to graduate, the 4th year of course, being the most physically demanding of the curriculum. The other 3 years were devoted to the more mental aspects of the shinobi profession. The only physical things done in the first 2 years was physical conditioning, exercises, tree jumping, hand seal practice, etc. etc. Actual taijutsu, weapon and ninjutsu practice, didn't see practical application until the 3rd year. Mainly it was practiced on the academy instructors. It was in the 4th year when students were finally allowed in any official capacity to face off against each other. That way the instructors could get a clear picture on who stood where in order to properly assign them to teams. The practice was done, normally 3 times a week, with the schedule randomized so the students' minds and bodies would get used to the prospect of fighting whenever it was asked of them. Of course most kids performed to expectations. The notable taijutsu powerhouse was, surprisingly, not a clan kid, but an orphan. To be fair though, most of the clans were missing from this year. No Aburame, Hyruga, Yamanaka, or Nara. The best ninjutsu kid was an Uchiha though, as far as Naruto could tell, and the best Kyune and Shuriken flinger was, surprisingly, one of the two Akimichi of the group. Alright children, the diminutive teacher said, taking her place at the side of the practice ring. Let's all try to beat each other with civility. Yes, she dryly quipped as she looked through the randomized lineup for today. Gokai Udao and Shizuka Moroi, please come on up so we can begin the learning. So who you gonna get paired up with this time? Shizune asked, plopping down next to him to wait with everyone else. Dunno, that was mostly true, but while the roster was mostly randomized, he'd noticed that his opponents were getting tougher and tougher. His first fight had been against Naotora, the class dead last. She was brash and loud like him, but she'd underestimated him, as did 90% of the class, and he'd used that to catch her completely off guard. And since she was the dead last, his next opponent didn't think much of the win, and so on and so on. Now they were catching on, so that element was out. But more than that, he noticed that each of his partners was just that much more dedicated, that much faster, stronger or smarter. Apparently, Z was trying to climb him up the ladder to see where exactly he should fit when it came to team placements. So no, he didn't know per se who his next enemy would be, but he could guess that it would be one of the class middlings most likely, though she was starting to run out of time if that was really her game and it wasn't just random chance as they said. They only had a handful of days left. I know you don't know, but come on, take a guess or something, Neru-chan. She ruffled his hair, then he heard the sharp inhale from her on one side and footsteps to his other. Turning to look, he found none other than Usu Tada, the favorite for this year's top rookie. He smiled. Hey Tada, the young man smiled back. Mind if I join you? He shifted a bit, shifting against Shizune to allow enough room for Tada to sit next to him. He was big for a kid. The only classmate that matched his height was one of the two Akimichi, physically stronger than most kids their age too, though that came at a trade-off of being somewhat slower than half the kids in the class too. Though, truth be told, given his family history, that might not be exactly a bad thing. While not of any Konoha clan, that did not mean the Usu name was a run-of-the-mill family. It was a samurai clan. Samurai had always been the standing force of the daimyo of the various states. As far as he remembered from his day, they never really played much of a part in the hidden village affairs. They were, frankly, glorified clients. Keep our borders safe from the other daimyo, kill whoever we need you to kill without question, and we'll line your pockets with enough money to keep this show running forever, was the status quo. This time around, the status quo was a bit more skewed. The first-year curricula, in political and historical lessons, had nearly held him back from meeting his own personal deadline of graduating in a single year, while ninja were a force to be reckoned with on any battlefield, having unlocked the secrets of chakra and the array of skills that came with such. Samurai were still very much the dominant military power of the continent. One ninja was worth a handful of samurai, but there were a hell of a lot more samurai than there were ninja in the daimyo's employ. Now, the daimyo could do more than threaten them with cutting off the cash flow. He could threaten them with war, or more likely extermination. What's more, he could win. It would be a brutal and bloody win for either side, that would effectively eviscerate both parties, leaving them as little more than carrion for the vultures that would swoop in from all sides to eat at the carcass. But now the daimyo around the continent seemed to have decided to hold on to some of their testicles when the villages were formed this time around. That left them with some negotiating leeway. One of those, in Konoha at least, was a student exchange program. A child of a samurai clan, a child of a shinobi clan, leaving their homes to live and serve their new families in whatever way was seen fit. This was to promote a lasting peace, friendship, love and trust between the great houses. Unofficially, it was the samurai better preparing themselves for the eventuality of fighting shinobi. If not domestic ones, then definitely foreign. No child from a samurai clan would be taught the true fighting techniques of the samurai beyond a handful of basics. When it came to sword wielding, a child from a shinobi clan, though especially Hyuga and Uchiha, that one had some trade to show off when he went off to his new home. That one could answer questions and teach them. Then, when the kids went back home, the samurai kid had 5 years shinobi experience and secrets under his belt. The shinobi kid had 3 years of philosophical study and 2, at best, of sword combat training, since most samurai started training their children at the ages of 14. Not exactly a huge amount of time to learn things from grandmasters and such, but oh well, such is life. Half the time the samurai kid just ended up learning sword techniques anyway, so Konoha wasn't exactly a victim that lived up to their side of the bargain either. At any rate, Tada sat and Naruto resisted the urge to poke some fun at Shizune, who, quite obvious to him, had something of a crush on the guy. It would get him a few laughs, but she knew where he lived. The fight was decent as far as academy-level students go. Both of them had their strengths and tried to use them, but one good kick that smacked against a forehead down to down, and that was that. The other fights were, for the most part, much the same. A good lucky hit normally ended them. Rarely was the fight reduced to out-brawling the other, and only the Akimichi ever got their opponents to yield, and even then, only when they managed to get them in a good hold, which by now many students had learned to avoid by any means necessary. Kaito, Shizune and Kanbei Shin, take your places, Z finally called. Shizune took a breath before standing. Wish me luck. Naruto nodded and smiled. Good luck. She marched down to the practice ring, standing opposite her opponent. Kanbei wasn't anything particularly special from what he could tell. No real strengths, no real weak points either. Begin. Shizune opened up with a volley of practice shuriken, a textbook tactic to get her enemy off balance when she closed in, and it worked well enough. The moment Kanbei used to dodge, she was closing the distance, launching herself at the young man with a flying kick, knocking him flat on his ass despite his hasty defense with the unbalanced footing. She jumped, looking to capitalize on her early advantage with a pounce to pin him to the ground, only for the aspiring genin to roll out of the way, kicking at her ribs with a clumsy kick that, nevertheless, hurt and knocked her on her side as both students scrambled to get back up. -0 The door was flung open with a crack that drove the knob into his wall. Was this your idea all along? Orochimaru turned around, looking up from his book as he raised a slender eyebrow. You barging into my office looking for all the world as though you wished to strangle me. No, I don't believe this was any plan of mine. You haven't taken on a student in 6 years and suddenly you're applying to take a team. He snapped the book closed, smirking. You and Sensei have been pestering me to take a more active role in the village for a while now. I figured why not start with this, just as Naruto's about to graduate then. Coincidence. Besides, I placed myself on the reserves list. I'm just there to convince whoever gets assigned as a sensei to his eventual team to step down so you can fill in the spot. Oh come now, he smiled blithely. Where's the trust, Tsu-chan? Oh screw you. He marched to a chair, seating himself on it as he tossed his book on the end table and laced his hands over his stomach. What exactly are you complaining about? That you're using Naruto as some kind of stepping stone Oro? He pursed his lips, mulling over the thought, then he smirked. I might be just a little bit guilty of such, but what exactly are you complaining about? I'm the best possible sensei in this village. Just look at Anko-chan, she's one of our strongest whack jobs. I'll give you that. We're all a little crazy, Tsunade. He doesn't need you making it worse, or you making some kind of statement, and his teammates won't need you neglecting them in favor of the prodigy, which he is. The other students will get by, but the whole point of early academy enrollment is to bring those talents to their full potential, and then you wonder why I say Saru-sensei spoiled you rotten. The sighed over dramatically, smirking faintly as he saw how his actions irritated her. If there was one thing Tsunade hated, it was being dismissed. Oh well, I suppose I'll just have to shoulder the burden of Sensei's partisanship. Is that all? Don't make me kick you through the wall, she growled. He opened his eyes, looking up at her, just the slightest bit more serious, though the smile remained. You know how this is gonna end by now. You'll shout and scream and I'll ignore you completely and do whatever I want. If it comes down to a fight, we'll blow up half the village training grounds before Sensei shows up to have us pulled apart, where we'll get a timeout and a rather stern lecture regarding the woes caused by mass property damage, and then I'll still do whatever I want. So can we skip all of that and just get to the me doing whatever I want part? You're an ass, you know that. The smile spread. I might be just a little bit guilty of such. It was just a few minutes after she'd left that a familiar older gentleman opened the door to his office, in a similar fashion, driving the knob that much deeper into the cracked wall as he held an equally familiar application form. Was this your idea all along? The Sannin smiled, half frustrated, half sardonic. No, I don't believe it was. -0 OWW, big baby, Naruto teased. She smacked him upside the head. Shut up. Then her hand returned to her jaw. That really hurt, he had no doubt. It looked like it hurt. If she didn't live with Tsunade, she'd probably be sporting an ugly bruise for the next week. As it was, it'd be gone by tomorrow most likely. She managed to win, but one really good punch had nearly taken her out of the fight, when half the class could have sworn her jaw had broken given the sound of the hit. To everyone's surprise, and his personal relief, it sounded worse than it was, and she kept herself in the fight, managing to carve out a win. She landed enough hits to have Z call the match in her favor. Now they were down to just a handful more students, and Naruto was starting to wonder when the hell he was going to be. Uzumaki, Naruto and Usu Taida, please take your places, Z called. A hush leveling the area before each student began to murmur with one another. Looks like she decided it best to work from the top to the bottom rather than the bottom to the top. He stood up, listening as Taida did the same, both of them marching down to the practice ring. When they arrived, Taida bowed at the waist. If there was one thing that could be said about the samurai clan boy, it was that he was polite and did his best to follow the traditions of his family, which meant his greatest strength was essentially taijutsu. He aced all of his tests and written tactic exams, was slightly above average in accuracy, but, most likely due to his upbringing before coming to the village, he didn't put as much effort in his ninjutsu, so that was just average, which essentially meant, especially due to his size, he had to use his ninjutsu to its fullest advantage over him. He took his stance, the basic academy stance. Taida did the same, though his was a bit more rigid in his foot positioning. He probably wouldn't use too many kicks if that was the case, so overcoming the taijutsu reach advantage wouldn't be impossible, just unlikely now. Begin, Z shouted, with a hand seal. Naruto focused. Bunshin no jutsu. He was never good at making a single, regular clone. 100 was an entirely different matter. Within a second the academy practice grounds were covered from corner to corner in grinning blondes. The students gasped. Even Z leaned forward in her seat, looking intently now at the fight. Taida's eyes widened, but in quick motion drew his shuriken and began throwing. A few of the clones dispelled as the weapons cut through the fragile illusion that formed them. The rest charged. To Naruto's surprise, Taida didn't choose to flee as most shinobi would have done, trying to get to a more advantageous position, or even buy time in order to think of a plan. He held his ground, bracing himself, charging in the middle of his clones. Naruto grinned. It was a good plan. He could think of more than a few ways to kill his enemy. None would fail. He'd gotten too good at killing dead things that refused to stay down for an aspiring genin to have a prayer, even with him like this, but he didn't want a clean win. He just wanted to see how much work he still had waiting for him, how much distance he'd have to cross before he could even have a prayer. The clones struck, and the blows passed him by, doing no damage and merely dispelling themselves with the fragile break, until finally, there was one solid kick across his face that nearly knocked him over, until his hand snapped forward and grabbed the owner of the offending limb, with a brutal punch to the stomach that knocked the wind out of him, and a follow-up that hit him about as hard as Shizune's opponent had hit her, striking him across the cheek. Naruto scarcely had time to catch his breath before he was thrown onto the ground with a solid thud. Not even fast enough to avoid an academy student, he recovered and looked up as Taida pounced, looking to pin him to the ground and get the win. And for a moment, he was not in the academy training grounds. He was not facing an all-too-polite exchange student. He was not in a friendly test. He was in a battlefield. The screams of dying, wounded men rising up to a crescendo of noise around him, a hurricane of sound that clawed at his ears as he looked up at the lone Sharingan eye spinning in its iris, the crackle of lightning roaring over the battlefield noise as Konoha's last Hokage rushed in for the kill, the howling of 1,000 birds meeting the unrelenting force of a Rasengan before his own death blow came at the hands of a tearful Sakura, his body sealed and burned by his remaining student, the last Hokage, the first of Team 7. His chakra surged, taking form in his hand, the shape of a whirling sphere coalescing into the faintest silhouette before he caught himself, blinked. The memories of a dead man in a dead future, vanishing like the ghosts of shadow, and he holds back from the deadly blow from sheer reflex. He vanishes in a puff of smoke, leaving only an academy standard explosive trap at his feet. Taida's eyes widened, his legs bracing to move when the thing exploded in a massive cloud of smoke, leaving him sputtering and hacking up a lung. Gotcha! The students heard through the cloud before Taida stumbled out of the impenetrable smoke, still hacking up his lungs with tears leaking from his eyes. Match! The students heard Z shout before a quickie rank wind jutsu did its work to blow the cloud away, revealing Naruto sitting at the edge of the ring, grinning from ear to ear despite the bloody lip. Soon enough the muttering of the other students began and Z clapped thrice to get them all to calm down. She looked tense, her lips pursed a bit more than usual as she looked them over. Naruto didn't dare look up, worried that if he did, and she'd seen that second, that moment, if she'd felt the killing intent, his look would be all the confirmation she needed. Alright students, we're done for the day now. I suggest you all go home and enjoy your weekend. Next week will be your last before the final examinations and we see which one of you made it. Good luck. And with that the teacher began to gather her things. Taida made his way over, still coughing a bit, his eyes still red from tearing up. A good match, the raven-haired youth said, bowing at the waist, smiling as he straightened. If that had been actual explosive tags, you'd be dead in that case too. The faux 4-year-old grinned once more, this damn smile slipping on so very easily all over again. Ha, that was fun. I want a rematch. Taida's smile grew a bit, holding just the slightest bit of bemusement. You are rather odd, Naruto-san. -0 by the time he got back home Naruto was full and satisfied. Tsunade had picked him and Shizune up, healed their cuts and bruises and then treated them to an early celebratory lunch. 3 more days and he'd find out who exactly he was getting on a team with. He'd be a genin, one step closer to Hunter Nin. When he stepped into his home, it was to be greeted by the now familiar sensation of his nightly watcher already in wait and Kakashi-sensei leaving, with his shift now done with her arrival. It was a moment's curiosity that wormed its way into his brain, idly trying to think of who she was. The signature was familiar but strangely alien. As he went about his nightly routine, getting ready to sleep, that idle curiosity kept on gnawing at him, getting just a little bit stronger, a little bit more irritating. Finally, as he was about to step into bed he realized something. Why the hell doesn't he just ask? And so with a sharp about face, he follows the signature, marching out of his room and down the hallway towards his potted plant. He stretches out his hand, and with a glimmer in the air, the Jinjutsu falls away, revealing the woman in an Anbu mask. She's surprised, any Anbu would be really, but still he can't recognize her behind the mask. He smiles up at her. Hi, I'm Naruto, what's your name? She tilts her head to the side, looking at him as though she is the most curious of hawks, one that had just found a rodent willing to walk up to it in order to curiously sniff at its talons. In a way he rather supposed he was. She didn't tell him her name. It had taken almost 5 minutes for him to get more than a go back to sleep Uzumaki-san. The conversation was short, clipped, a little awkward, and a little amusing from his perspective. He supposed he should have expected such. She was probably still reeling at the fact that he had found her at all, but still she didn't give him her name, so he just called her An-chan. He'd nearly made Kakashi trip out of his tree when he called him Boo-san the next day. Either the two of them were too embarrassed to say that they'd been caught, or Gigi had decided to take on a wait-and-see approach regarding this little development. Kakashi could still hide from him with a little more effort though. He did it the next day. He was good enough, and Chan always had just a little bit of her chakra exposed though. Just enough for him to pick up her signal. Still, this livened up his days a little. For nearly the last week every day he'd go out to do some training, and now had the full and unbridled capacity to ask Kakashi for advice whenever he found him, which happened to be whenever Kakashi didn't want to put in the full effort to hide well. So with the Anbu, having no orders to do the contrary, and not being a big enough ass to ignore him completely, not having his book helped in this last bit, reluctantly gave a little advice and even showed him the basics of an Anbu chakra control exercise when he noticed that such was what Naruto was primarily working on. Then at night, when he'd get home he'd make dinner for himself and Chan, something that primarily consisted of ramen. All the while he would talk her off, hoping to get a word of response but mostly just talking to her while she just stood there. She never ate a bite of the food while he was awake but it was always gone by the time he woke up. He hoped she wasn't just throwing it away. Tonight was the last night before the team assignments and he was practically bouncing off the bloody walls. Just one more day and he'd be a genin again. Step 1 would be finished with. He finished off his shower drying himself off before he dressed and stepped out of the bathroom. He was 5 now so just one more year before he wouldn't need to use that thing anymore. He sensed as Kakashi left and Chan arrived. Chan, he called, smiling. The woman didn't even put up the pretense of stealth anymore, marching in through his front door, judging by the sound. He marched out of his bathroom, stepping out to the hallway where he found, much to his surprise, his dining table overlaid with a number of bags, stuffed with food. You cannot keep having ramen every day. The flat drool brought his eyes over to her, standing in a corner halfway across the room, cloaked from head to toe as if she'd never moved. It was impressive considering his whole table was full of stuff. Oh come on, I make good ramen. Not anymore you don't, she answered in a, to all senses, completely impassive tone. But Naruto recognized smug satisfaction a mile away and his danger senses were tingling. He blinked, confused for a second before he paled, bolting out of the room and into the kitchen. It was a moment later when half the neighborhood was woken up by his anguished cry of despair. -0 I hate you, he hissed, stuffing the last of the groceries into its proper place in his now empty cabinets. I'll live, she replied from the other room. He huffed, staring up at the assortment of foods. What am I supposed to make? Food? Everyone's a comedian or something, he muttered to himself. Between Dan and now and Chan he was getting rather tired of witty retorts and dry sarcasm. He looked up again, pulling out a bag of rice and then picking out some meats from his freezer. A little while later he set 2 plates down on his table, already knowing Chan wouldn't eat now, but leaving it out for her anyway. The chicken was a bit saltier than it should be, and the rice a little undercooked, but not bad for a first try if he did say so himself. It was edible at least, and this time it didn't end with a burnt refrigerator, exploding toaster and an electrical fire in the bathroom. Hey Chan, he called, any idea who's gonna turn out to be my sensei tomorrow? None, she answered truthfully. You'd be better off asking Busan. He was about to ask who the hell that was when he recalled that was the very name he'd placed on Kakashi to keep up appearances. I guess he'd see more of the academy since he's around during the day. She said nothing to that. Finally he was done. Hopping off his chair, he took his place and marched onto the stool to wash it in the sink before putting it away. He marched right up to his nighttime watcher, smiling at her. Night Chan, she nodded. He leaned forward and hugged her. Once more he got that feeling of being a mouse beneath the gaze of the hawk, one that was beginning to wonder why its talons hadn't carved their way through soft rodent flesh yet. He giggled, letting her go and heading off to bed. The next morning the plate was empty. -0 Alright, then class, Z called, clapping thrice as she set her books down on the desk. Today is the last day, and all of you will now be assigned to teams, where you'll most likely be paired up with at least one member of this class who you can't stand, and you'll all have to look at each other and work together every day for the next few years. Aren't you all excited? Naruto fought down a snicker. That was fairly accurate all things considered. She left out the part of how the teams eventually grow to consider each other family though. Alright, now let's get this started. Team 1, this is so exciting, Shizune whispered beside him, and he has to smile a little more. He could barely remember the day he was assigned to teams, but he did remember the excitement, the anticipation rushing through his limbs. He keeps that moment for as long as he can, grips it. Every good memory is something he tries to hold on to as much as possible, otherwise the bad ones will overwhelm him when those moments come where he can't just block them out anymore. And those moments are there, circling like ravenous wolves, waiting to sink their fangs deep into his flesh. Team 4Z calls, Kaito, Shizune, Inazuka, Katsuai and Yoshinari Itsu. Your sensei will be Mu Norioshika. Oh, that's me Neru-chan. She hugged him, so suddenly he almost slid off his chair as she squealed into his hair. He was happy for her. It seemed for a moment she was torn between hugging him and waiting out for his own team to be announced and leaving with hers. Soon enough though, she left with hers. Team 8. Naruto Uzumaki, his ears practically swiveled forward to hear better. Naotora Ryoko and Korichitsuru Hachiba. Ryoko, he thought, turning to look at the girl he'd beaten in the practice ring just a few weeks ago, his first opponent in it. The class dead last. That means that congratulations Mr. Uzumaki, you've not only managed to graduate within a year, but you also managed to snag the top spot, Z remarked. As expected of my future student, a voice hissed from somewhere behind him. Naruto's blood went cold at that unmistakable voice. No. Turning to look at the back of the class, Naruto found none other than the snake Sanin morphing out of a wall, smirking at him -0. The first words out of Naruto's mouth the second he got to the designated meeting place at the village edge, was a vehement query. Was this your idea the entire time? The snake Sanin paused, lips pursing, almost in displeasure for a moment before he schooled his features. Does it matter? He guessed it didn't. He was still stuck in the same boat regardless. And it had been him that had showed off his memories to get Orochimaru to nominate him. He knew that there was an ulterior motive. He just assumed it was glory seeking at nominating a strong candidate for the academy, not to actually be his sensei and take even greater glory when he assumed the credit for having taught said strong candidate. He guessed the motive, he'd just deduced the wrong method. So you're really gonna be our sensei then? Ryoko asked, staring up at the man, not with a little bit of awe. While Orochimaru was a known recluse in the village, his prowess as a ninja was known worldwide. He wondered how long it would be before everyone knew him as a sicko and a power-mad lunatic. Sweet, we're getting the best of the Sanin as our sensei. Hachiba grinned, adjusting his new forehead protector. Orochimaru's smile seemed innocent enough, but it made Naruto's skin crawl all the same. The best, perhaps, but my teaching you remains to be seen. Team 8. The two genin looked confused before the Sanin clarified. The academy merely judges if you children have the faintest potential to actually become genin. I am the one that gets the final say on whether they were right or wrong today. So, you're going to take something of a test. What kind of test? Ryoko grinned. We'll beat it, no problem, if it gets you as our sensei. Now his smile was clearly predatory, even to them. We'll see. -0. It didn't take him long to realize where they were headed. He should have expected it really. The first place he met this bastard is the place where he decides to hold his genin test. Training Ground 44, better known as the Forest of Death, loomed over them like a monolithic beast in its own right. We're going in there? Hachiba asked. As an answer, Orochimaru forms two clones, each one grabbing a genin by the shoulder as he places his hand atop Naruto's head before the youth can react. Then they're gone in the blur of a Shunshin jutsu. When they appear again, they're in the very heart of the forest. Thickened trees hundreds of feet high blot out the sun. A dreary gloom hangs over the place like a pool. This is your test, the serpent says as his shadow clones dispel, and he takes a few steps forward, away from them. Naruto looks around, searching for danger while trying to keep his eyes fixed on the snake. Ryoko is the one that begins to ask, what exactly are we surviving? Suddenly, all three feel a sharp, burning agony lance up their legs. They each scream and Naruto has enough speed to look down in time to see a snake slithering into the grass, two puncture marks standing out on his clothed calf. The stain of blood darkens the fabric of his pants. You have 3 days, the Sanin said, bringing all three students' eyes up towards his smiling veneer. Make it out of this forest alive, and you're my students. Fail and, well, that should be obvious considering you've just been poisoned. Are you insane? Hachiba shouted. You can't be serious. Naruto drew his kunai and charged and attacked, all his suspicions proven in an instant. Orochimaru moved. His eyes could barely follow the movement before his arm was snagged in an iron-laced grip. The Sanin's strength seemed brutally unreal as the pale man painfully twisted his arm to just before the point of breaking it. With a single twitch it would snap. With a different one it would dislocate. Not nice, Neru-chan, the serpent hissed in that slithering voice as he looked to his other two students. 3 days, he repeated. Then you're beyond saving. Then he was gone, releasing Naruto, before he melted into the shadows of this forest like a spectre. -0. The snake Sanin chuckled as he emerged from his Shunshin. The looks on their faces. Was this your idea the entire time? Oh, for God's sake, he snapped, whirling on the intruder that appeared in a similar Shunshin technique, only to reveal Sarutobi's head. Anbu, Hatake, he all but growled. The next person that asked him that question was going to get hurt, badly. That poison non-lethal. He trailed off, but the warning was obvious. Something of my own brew, he said, smirking a bit. He always did enjoy seeing his own work in its full splendor. They'll certainly feel like they're dying. The silver-haired ninja nodded. What exactly is the test about? Why not just go with Sarutobi's bell test? The Sanin snorted. Bah, you'd have them chase you around with such a simplistic goal. No, he chuckled. What brings about truth in anyone isn't a goal, and it isn't a mission. His eyes gained something of a distant look. the smile evaporating, and Kakashi had to wonder just where he'd ventured down into his memories. It's fear, he finally said, and facing true danger. Watch and learn, Hatake. This is how shinobi of Konohara to be tested. -0, he can't be serious. He's not serious, is he? Hachiba shouted, almost sounding hysterical. I'm not waiting to find out if he is, Ryoko replied, raven hair whipping around as she turned to and fro, seemingly searching for a direction to move in. South, Naruto growled, rubbing his arm. What? She asked, whirling around to look at him. We gotta go south, he answered. This place is north of the village. Sounds good to me, Hachiba readily agreed. You sure? This had better not be you trying to look cool or something, Uzumaki. I'm sure, he shot back. This place was too troublesome, twice over in order for him to forget where the hell it was. Twice the snake had screwed him and his team over here. That was 2 times too many. The second he had the strength to do it, he was shoving a Rasengan down the Sanin's throat. Better be, she snapped. It wasn't long before they were running through the trees. -0 from places hidden. Kakashi watched Orochimaru's smile grow a bit. Not a bad deduction from Naruto, the Anbu surmised. Still, he looked around. I recognize this place. We're at the northern edge of the forest, almost 3 days' travel exactly from the forest to the village edge, and that's if you have a clue as to where you're going. Did you set them up to fail, or something? The Sanin smirked. -0 It was just beginning to approach sundown when the 3 genin could no longer shrug off the truth. They felt horrible. It had started with coughs, from there, an all too dry throat, rashes breaking out over their flesh and nausea churning their guts. They each knew it would only get worse. To his shame, Naruto was the first one that made the others stop. He was smaller, his metabolism was faster with his healing, the poison was affecting him at nearly twice the rate of his teammates. He tried to keep pace regardless until finally, his legs failed him on a jump, and he nearly plunged to the forest floor to break a limb, or his neck. It was only the fact that he knew how to stick to a tree that saved him. You okay? Hachiba called a moment later as he came to a stop on another branch. Naruto actually had to take a moment to catch his breath before he could even think about answering. His heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was trying to hammer its way out of his rib cage. He's the great Uzumaki, he'll be fine. Ryoko mocked through hard labored breaths. We're the ones that'll keel over there. This isn't the time for goddamn jokes. Hachiba growled. We have to keep moving. Naruto looked up at the sun, now red in the sky. No, Ryoko hissed, taking a seat as Naruto managed to gather the strength to pull himself up to the branch he'd been hanging off of. We've got to get food and make some kind of camp before the sun sets. Make camp? To what? Sleep? Yes, numbnuts, we need that. We also need to get food. We could be almost out of here. We have to keep on moving. No. We have to make camp, because if we keep on going and we're still stuck here later, it'll be too dark to see. And we'll be tired, poisoned and hungry. -0 The boy panics, Orochimaru observed. He's a genin. Surprised he hasn't burst into tears by now. The girl's keeping her cool well enough though. The pale man nodded. Indeed. I wonder just how she is considered the dead last. Overconfident as hell, didn't study and sucks for everything but taijutsu. Even that is just street brawling more than anything else. Orphanage recruit. Close enough. Father's a trader, travels constantly, almost never in the village. Mother's a lover of fine wines, to put it politely. Orochimaru smirked. Oldsy must be losing her touch. Difficult to teach when they refused to listen. -0 They made camp, such as it was. Naruto, allowing nature chakra to guide him as best he could with his lack of practice, found a hollowed out, dead tree, big enough for them to use. He was relieved when Ryoko and Hanbi volunteered to go get food as opposed to gathering firewood. Right now, though he hadn't said anything, he could barely see straight, let alone take down an animal big enough for all of them to eat, and he was only feeling worse. I'll feel better with some food and sleep, he thought to himself, his headache pounding across his forehead. He could not die here. He had to survive this. There was so much he had to do still. He moved about gathering dry leaves and twigs for the kindling. The forest of death had plenty of those, so thankfully he didn't have to expel too much effort all in all. With his small hands and waning strength, it took 3 trips to gather an amount he thought would be enough to last them the night. The sun had set before his teammates got back. Hachiba managed to get 3 squirrels. Ryoko just caught a single snake. Hers was the more satisfying meal in his personal opinion. Can he really do this? Hachiba suddenly asked as they ate. This is crazy. He can't just kill fellow leaf ninja. Never trust a snake. Naruto wheezed, eyes drooping a bit despite his effort to finish the meal. Thought he was your special mentor or something, Uzumaki, Ryoko hissed, biting into a rather tasteless piece of meat. The forest of death didn't offer much in the way of seasoning. This time, strained as the words were, the hostility was unmistakable in his tone, even if his words hadn't portrayed it just as easily. Kill him one day. She opened her mouth as though she was about to say something more when she finally took a good look at him. Hey, you okay? Hey. But his world went dark and the two genin had to actually scramble to keep him from tipping face first into the open fires. Ryoko gnawed on her lower lip as she and Hachiba settled Naruto back, watching him convulse on the ground as his eyes rolled so far back only the whites could be seen and blood began leaking from his nose. Shit, he's dying. He's really dying, she screamed, holding him down for lack of anything better to do. No shit, he's dying. He's half our size, Hachiba shouted right back. They held him down, every second passing in unimaginably slow agony for all huddled within that little hollow. It seemed an eternity before he finally settled. What the hell are we gonna do? Hachiba groaned, rocking a little where he sat. He probably didn't notice. Her mouth was dry as she answered, feeling her own heart pounding with adrenaline-fueled fear. We're gonna go to sleep for a few hours, wake up, and carry him out of here the rest of the way, that's what. Then when we get back, we're getting Hokage-sama to hold down that snake bastard so we can cut his balls off and feed them to him. Despite her bravado, her shaking hands and pale features showed just how rattled she really was. Despite how much they needed it, neither child got much sleep that night, and the next morning, Naruto was as pale as a corpse. His breathing didn't sound much better than a dead man's either. Worst of all, he wasn't waking up. -0 Orochimaru smirked. Kakashi had long since left and his replacement was keeping to herself a ways off after Kakashi had briefed her and told her not to interfere. The poison had worked its way through Naruto's system even quicker than he'd hoped. Now let's see how they do.
We have to leave him. Ryoko whipped her head up, blinking at her fellow, aspiring genin as though he'd just grown a second head. What? We can't carry him, the boy explained. We'll just tire ourselves out and we won't be able to. We're not leaving him here, she protested, cutting him off. He's still alive, not for much longer, Hachiba shouted back. It's just been a day, look at him. We've got to move fast and we can't do that if we. She stood up, silver grey hair whipping around her face as she all but snarled. We're gonna carry this dumbass back and I don't care if I've got to tie him to you, get me? Hachiba opened his mouth, moving to protest when he seemed to think better of it and closed his mouth. Ryoko looked down, thinking, we'll carry him in shifts. You go first, I go next. I'm not going, you're going first. What do you think, I'm stupid? I carry him first, tire myself out and you just haul ass when it's your turn. You go first. I'll live up to my end. You're not. You can stay here and bitch with me and keep wasting time. You can try to run and we can fight, wasting even more time, or you can do what I tell you and we can try to get the hell out of this. Long and short of it is we're not leaving the little bastard. -0 Orochimaru watched, yellow eyes gleaming like jewels as the sun rose over the edge of the horizon. You wanted this? He turned a little, looking at the woman-child in her Anbu uniform, the stark white mask glinting with the rays of the early morning. That's the purpose of the test, to see if they'll leave him to die, she concluded, her head tilting to the side. I'm only not certain which outcome will cause them to succeed or fail. The Sannin smiled a little. They should do what proper Konoha ninja should do. That's the only way to succeed. And Naruto, how will you judge him in his state? He'll pass, of course. You would take him as a student no matter what. That hardly seems fair. Life is fair. -0 It was not, by any stretch of the imagination, how she could have ever dreamed her shinobi career would start. She was feeling sicker than yesterday. Her bones ached. She wanted nothing more than to lie down and sleep again, even as her stomach churned at the edge of nausea. Every muscle felt little better than overcooked noodles, flimsy and weak as she forced them to push her along in ever shorter leaps across the trees. And to think, she still had to carry him after Hachiba couldn't do it anymore. She coughed, stopping in her run to lean against the trunk of a tree. It sounded wet. She could almost taste the phlegm at the back of her throat as spittle specked the hand she'd used to cover her mouth. Hachiba stopped ahead of her, his pasty skin and black ringed eyes serving to only let her imagine how bad she must have looked as well. She was going to kill that snake bastard. She looked up, coiling her muscles again before jumping off. Keep going. Even speaking felt like it leached out the energy from her. She tried to ignore the blood that had been mixed with the spit. -0 Are you seriously gonna let him have a team? Sarutobi sighed. It had been the third time she'd asked in twice as many minutes, and the 100th time since a week ago when her teammate, his student, first filed for the position. What do you want me to do exactly, Tsunade? Walk up to him and say, yes, well, seeing as how you've signed all the appropriate paperwork and properly filled out all agreements, clauses, guarantees and have proceed to do your due diligence well in time for the responsibility. I've decided to not grant this request despite the fact that I have no other reserve teachers on standby, simply because your motivations are iffy at best and I don't trust you, and this is primarily based on a simple hunch of having known you for the last 20 years. How exactly do you view that as being anywhere near impartial as I'm supposed to be as Hokage? Oh come on, you and I both know Orochimaru is practically the antithesis to Genin instructor. He trained Anko, one student who he took on long trips to train in private without doing anything below C rank. Does not a Genin instructor make, maybe not,
but we've always pressured him to interact with the villagers more. This time he'll have to with a large team, yes, because Orochimaru's people skills let him mingle oh so well. Do you remember the last time we managed to convince him to go to a festival? Sarutobi nearly winced. That had been interesting to say the very least. He can still train those students to be good, strong shinobi that will serve the village well. Do I really have to bring up the incident reports on Anko for this? Sarutobi rolled his eyes. Alright, look, he's always had trouble with people and he might not be the warmest of instructors, but the fact of the matter is that outside of using my executive powers as village leader to revoke his application, something that would be a very gross misuse of my authority given his results. Yes, I know your reservations on Anko Tsunade, he interrupted before she could start. The fact remains though that she is still one of our very best operatives for high-ranking assassinations. Her record outside the village can't be disputed, spotty as her record within the village walls might be. So yes, I am going to allow him his chance, she scoffed. You make it sound as if there's something other than personal ambition as the motivation here. The old monkey rubbed his temples. Did you two fight? Did he kill your pet? Or call you a dirty name, and I miraculously missed the ensuing blowout or something? No, I just know him well enough to call out his BS. I trust him with my life, but that's my prerogative after fighting next to him for 20 some odd years, and where I trust him I can still very easily admit, he's a complete dick half the time and not the best choice to be looking after preteens. I'm not going to take the team away from him, he stated flatly, leaning back in his seat. If you're really so interested in this, take your own private steps to assuage your worries as long as it doesn't blow up half the village, and yes, that is as close to a green light as you're gonna get to stick your nose in his business to a reasonable degree, but his request for a genin team is going to be upheld. As much as you or I might hold reservations about the pseudo-parenting skills he'll need to help these students, the fact is he'll never get the opportunity to prove either of us wrong or right if we don't give him the chance every once in a blue moon. Can I come back here and kick you when this whole thing blows up? She asked with a look that could have scratched his face off. You're allowed to come back here and tell me I told you so. That much I'll grant. -0. It was a little past noon when it was her turn. Hachiba looked ready to keel over, breathing like a winded dog, coughing up half his lungs between breaths. She trudged over, feet slogging through the light mud of the forest floor. They'd long since abandoned the tree tops when it was clear their legs didn't have the strength to carry them in the jumps anymore. When she lifted Naruto, her arms nearly failed her, and it was obvious after a moment that she wouldn't be able to carry him like the child he was. She opted instead to lift him to lay across her shoulders, every muscle in her legs feeling as though it was being slowly carved open by flaying knives. She looked up at Hachiba. Come on, she said, let's just keep moving. He nodded, and soon enough they were both walking again. They didn't have the strength to run anymore. She had to focus to even do that, concentrate on just putting one foot in front of the other, struggling with waning strength. Her insides burned, her throat bled, black fluid leaked from her tear ducts as blue veins became visible under pasty white skin. Worse and worse the symptoms grew as she focused on just putting one foot in front of the other. Then she tripped. She hadn't noticed the route. She could barely see the ground, so clouded her vision was. It snagged on the top of her foot and she fell forward, not even having the presence of mind to break her fall. The breath left her lungs and Naruto's weight on her shoulders didn't help at all. She hissed, cursing as she struggled to draw in a proper breath amidst her coughs. She glanced up, watching as Hachiba kept walking. She would have called for him if she had the strength. She watching him keep walking as she struggled to get to her hands and knees. Come on, she thought with a strangled hiss. You still have a whole day left before you roll over and die in a ditch, damn it. Move. She got to her feet. When she looked down at the half-dead Naruto, she reached down to lift him. She only succeeded in nearly tripping again in the slick mud. When lifting him failed, she tried dragging. A sound not entirely unlike a giggle escaped her when she realized she was losing the strength in her fingers to make a firm enough grip. To go with the lack of strength, she walked over to his side. She didn't know if she'd have the strength to stand back up, so she didn't kneel. She kicked him. Come on, you've been sleeping enough. Get up, I can't carry you anymore. And Hachiba left. I'm talking to a corpse, she noted somewhere, ignoring it as she dug her foot into his ribs again. Come on, get up, you damn bastard. But he lay there, pale and unmoving. She wasn't even sure if he was breathing anymore. Get up, get up. She kicked one more time with all her strength, and on this one her leg buckled beneath her, sending her to the ground where she was close enough to lift a fist and let it fall against his chest. You're not supposed to die this easy, she hissed, unaware of the frustrated, angry tears that glimmered behind her eyes. Get up, please. She tries to stand. She can't. I don't want to die here. She's crying now, and the sobs are unmistakable this time. Not here, not in this forest, not in some forgotten corner where that coward Hachiba would be the only one to survive. Enough. She doesn't recognize the voice. doesn't even see the person before she's lifted by strong, calloused hands, hugging the fabric of a cloak as the sudden vertigo of her movement churns her guts with nausea all over again. You're interfering with my exam. She recognizes that voice though, and she clutches the robe tighter, burying her face into the neck of the woman. Your test is done, she hears her state flatly, the voice jumping from the pulse point of her neck against Ryoko's cheek. The woman starts walking and before long she's carried out of the forest. As she leaves she notices that little, pleased smile on that horrid, pale face. It's a leering wicked thing to her eye, one that sends a shiver down her spine. She closes her eyes and thanks whatever might be listening out there for ending this nightmare. -0 It was hours after this, that he woke to a white ceiling. Not exactly unfamiliar. What was unfamiliar was the fact that he was feeling, all things considered, great. Seeing as how his last memories was of a poison-induced blackout, he rather suspected he should be feeling a bit crappier, truth be told. He sat up, surprised to find Dan sleeping in a corner of the room, a trail of drool leaking from the corner of his mouth to trail down his cheek. "Da," he croaked. His throat was dry. Why did that always seem to happen when he woke up at the hospital? He reached for the bedside table where a full glass of water was waiting for him. Evidently, Tsunade knew better with so many patients. He drank the warm water gratefully, swallowing and gasping for breath when he was done. Dan, the white-haired man, jumped a bit, scrunching up his features at the foul taste in his mouth. Ugh. Oh hey kiddo, you're up. How the heck did I even get here? Where are Hachiba and Ryoko? Anbu carried you in, Dan explained. Su-chan was having an apoplectic fit, I swear. She stormed out after she was sure you and your teammate would be safe. Damn near destroyed the forest of death in the bloodbath that followed. Naruto paled. Tsunade had gone to fight that snake bastard alone. Is she alright? What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be helping her? Dan smirked. Me? Get between a fight Tsunade's having with Oro. I'm good but I ain't that good. Besides if I do she'll complain about not getting enough exercise later. Naruto's mouth was hanging slightly open. You know, you could be a little more, I don't know, concerned maybe. He tried to kill me and my teammates. What makes you think he wouldn't do? Actually he didn't, Dan interrupted with a lazy shrug. The drugs he pumped into you were a real nasty mix but it wasn't anything lethal. You've been sitting here for 3 or 4 hours with Tsu-chan's seal letting it run its course faster. It dissolves into little more than water after it done a fair job of making you feel miserable and sick for a few days. The silver-haired man scratched his chin. Gotta give him points for creativity if nothing else. The blonde blinked. He didn't poison us. Dan shook his head. I know you've lost your memories kiddo but one thing you can count on is the fact that you're probably one of the only people that's actually safe from Oro. He held you when you were a baby you know. I think you're the only kid besides Anko he might actually like. That's not very reassuring. The door opened, and Naruto was greeted to the sight of Tsunade, scratched, mud-covered, irritated Tsunade. She looked at Dan. Keep the count, 11 even, the white-haired man nodded. She looked back at Naruto, the hard glint vanishing from her eyes. Hey kiddo, she greeted, marching in, green hands already focusing with chakra. Nothing missing, she asked. Nah, he answered. I feel fine actually. How are Ryoko and Hachiba? Ryoko's still in her room, she answered, sleeping it off. Hachiba was picked up by his parents an hour or so ago from what I'm told. They're both okay, and the snake, she smirked. What do you think? -0 the next day Orochimaru was still cradling his skull with an ice pack, sitting in his home resting from Tsunade's wrath. Unlike her he didn't have the luxury of just healing everything and moving along like a fiddle. He gave as good as he got in any non-lethal match, but with her it always had the rather distinct irritating factor of seeing her prancing around without a care for the odd broken bone or two after it was done. Meanwhile he was here nursing a bruise the size of the village monument on his ribs and what felt like a cracked skull. Seeing as how the only medic he'd trust to come within 10 feet of him was the one that inflicted these injuries, he was stuck healing the old-fashioned way for the most part. Still he'd managed to write up and file his report before her rampage had thundered along to find him, having sent it off via summoned snake to deliver it to the proper archivists. He'd have taken it himself if he hadn't made a point to avoid property damage. Tsunade certainly wouldn't have half the mind to avoid given her anger if they'd met in the village proper, and people said he wasn't considerate. There was a knock on his door, and he tried to sense if it was Tsunade, Sarutobi or Anko, his usual visitors. He couldn't tell. He blamed the cracked skull. It's open, he called instead. The door slammed open, the knob cracking against the wall. Tsunade then, back for round 2 already? The voice that reached out to his consciousness was certainly not hers though, and the words made him want to choke this person. Was this your idea the entire time? He was sorely tempted to smother himself with the ice pack. What he croaked out. Nefarious, twisted little scheme have I concocted in my mind this time. Am I guilty of poisoning the village's water supply, consuming the souls of newborn children, lining the village's flower shops with an overabundance of fertilizer, creating giant green monstrosities that will consume us all? What else could I have done this week, my dear Z, that I am greeted by such sweet accusations? You know damn well what you did. The little woman stormed into his home, removing her scarf and her coat to stave off the late November chill. She was little above eye level even with him sitting down. She threw down a piece of paper on the coffee table he was propping his feet on, pointing at it as though it was a condemned criminal. You gave them a test they couldn't pass just so you could fail them and pass Naruto all on his own. Orochimaru made an effort to raise his head, glaring with a deadpan stare, all the fury of a sleep-deprived, pain-sullen in his gaze. They should have acted as ninja, he said simply. Naruto was dead weight and they had to leave him. The girl stubbornly refused and the boy let himself be cowed. Neither one of them deserved to be Genin of Konoha. Yes, how convenient. And if they would have left him, you'd be turning right around and saying that they should have been loyal to their teammate and tried to save him before abandoning him. She placed her hands on her hips, glaring at him with that ever-present purse of her lips that vaguely resembled a scowl. Is mind reading one of your many talents, Z? Oh please, I taught you for the first 4 years of your career and your reputation is hardly spotless. This stinks to high heaven, she scoffed, bringing her hands up to an air quote act as shinobi should have. You love the wordplay in the games. You've always loved tricking people while telling them a half-truth, or a whole truth. You practically get off on it. Yes, well, it's not your decision to make. Sarutobi is the one that ultimately decides, and oh bollocks. She waved aside his statement. He has to give deference to you because you were there, and even if he didn't have to do that he'd go along with it, because more than anything else he needs strong ninja. Anko speaks for your results as is, so he wouldn't really object to you taking Naruto on as a private apprentice. He let his head fall back with a sigh through his nostrils. Don't you seem to be getting awfully angry about the damn right I am. They're my students and I'm not going to let you screw around with their futures. Futures that they've justly earned. Their only mistake here was getting assigned an up-jumped arrogant schmuck like you as their sensei with dreams of training the next god of ninja, or whatever's going on in that head of yours. He rolled his eyes, taking a breath. Is there a point to this shouting match? Yes there is. You're not failing, Ryoko. Ryoko? Not the boy he left, she stated simply. Another year at the academy will do good for his discipline. Ryoko did her very best and she deserves to pass. So you're passing her? You're giving me orders? No, I'm old, crazy and cranky, damn it, I get to give orders. He would argue that point, but then he recalled the Konoha leadership, Sarutobi, Homura, Koharu, the daimyo, the Hyuga clan elders. Somehow he felt they might be a tad bit biased if he brought up the issue. She took a breath. You know I'm right. And you know somewhere in that little head of yours, though God knows you'd stab yourself in the tongue before admitting it, that she did what was right. So you'll pass her, she said as though his protests were inconsequential and he'd already agreed. Now why exactly do you look little better than roadkill? Was it Tsunade? No, it was the other woman, with a temper and enough strength in her finger to level a building. She always did know how to give you a good kick to the head when you needed it. Z chuckled, all crooked teeth and laugh lines. HRMPH. I'll make you some chicken soup and you'll feel better, she said, sounding so much like the kindly little witch she pretended to be. Then you'll write up a new report for the Hokage on your team. She patted him on the knee as she passed by, and Orochimaru only briefly wondered at the absurdity of anyone making him chicken soup, let alone one doing so after they'd come in here with the proverbial rock in hand. He supposed stranger things had happened. And what's all this mess here? He heard her call from the kitchen. I know you don't entertain guests, but that's no reason to be unkempt. He rolled his eyes. On second thought, being chastised for his cleaning habits by a god only knows how old academy instructor in his own home might be the oddest thing that had happened to him in his career -0. It was nearly 2 days later that found Naruto and Ryoko sitting in the Hokage's office, waiting for the old man to show up. Hey, he greeted. Hey yourself, she answered back. Feeling better, princess? Naruto's nose scrunched in distaste. Princess, we had to carry your ass like one. I was gonna go with damsel in distress, but that's just too long to say in conversation, she groused, not at all amused at the frustration and fear Naruto's 5-year-old constitution had brought her. Naruto was tempted to protest, but seeing as how she had technically put her life at risk to save him, he was willing to let it go. Sorry I wasn't more of a help, she shrugged. Guess it wasn't your fault. The door opened, bringing their attention towards Sarutobi as the aged Hokage entered, a kindly smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. Naruto-kun, Ryoko-chan. Ryoko stood and bowed awkwardly, utterly unused to the act. Hokage-sama, hey old man. She gave him an odd look as Sarutobi ruffled his hair and patted her on the shoulder before walking by them to sit on his chair. He took off his hat, revealing his liver-spotted scalp. Word is you two had an interesting exam. Your student's a whack job, Ryoko blurted out before she blushed, remembering who she was talking to. That snake's bad news, old man, Naruto growled. Sarutobi looked sadly at the boy. To think he'd once been so very fond of the pale Sanin. Yes, well, he leaned forward, lacing his fingers in front of his mouth in a way that reminded Naruto of his Tsunade. The fact is you two passed your exam, Hachiba didn't. No one missed the cheerful gleam in her eyes when she asked.
No, Orochimaru has deemed him unfit to be a genin as of yet, given his panic. I'm inclined to agree. But you two passed his exam and that means you two, and whatever genin he chooses from the reserve roster will be his students. You're leaving us with him? Ryoko asked, incredulous. His methods were unorthodox and I realize you might have trouble working with him, so I'm offering you a choice of staying on or being relegated into the genin reserve list until another team can be found for you. How long would we be on the reserves? Unknown. It depends on how badly sensei need a new teammate. Could be months, could be a few years, though that's rare. The average is a year or two, with the most fill-ins being due to the genin passing on to becoming chunin as opposed to the death of a squadmate. Naruto bit the inside of his cheek. Despite his record, no sensei in their right mind would take a 5-year-old to a chunin examination. Without the odd outlier or desperate team, he'd most likely be stuck on that reserve list until he was within a far more acceptable age. You don't have any other available jounin? Sarutobi shook his head. None really, and to be honest I suspect Orochimaru's involvement in that. When he wants something he plans its acquisition like a military campaign, and right now he wants this team. The only wild card he can't factor in is your respective acceptances of going on the reserve lists. Naruto seethed at the simple circumstance that he couldn't wait. Every day was one day less in the ever-shortening time span he had to prepare for Akatsuki, for Toby. Even now that guy was going around the elemental nations, laying the groundwork for everything he had lost. He couldn't sit around with his thumb up his ass. He had to get past being a genin and he had to do it quick. If he had to do it while keeping one eye open for a snake behind his back, so be it. I'm not going on the reserves, he announced resolutely. I'll ask for a sensei transfer 6 months from now, but I'm not going on the reserves. Sarutobi raised an eyebrow, curious, but he didn't press for information as he turned to Ryoko. And you, Ryoko-chan? The grey-haired girl frowned, almost scowled, glaring at Naruto before turning back to him. I ain't quitting either. He had a distinct impression that it was more a competitive nature than good judgment at work there. Still, very well. Then you are officially teammate under the guide of Jounin Orochimaru. Report to Training Ground 17 tomorrow morning at 8 AM. I'll send word to your sensei of your acceptance later today. And just like that, their genin life was officially underway.
Naruto really didn't want to say what was becoming rather apparent. He really didn't. So he'd just settle for saying that studying under Orochimaru was not what he'd been expecting, and he'd been expecting quite a few things. He was, in comparison to the other teachers he'd had beforehand, he was not going to give the man a compliment. He would settle on a perfectionist and demanded such in both his students' ability to learn and his ability to teach. In short, he wouldn't let up until you could do whatever it was he was asking you to do. Jiraiya and Kakashi were very hands-off teachers. The only teacher he had that Orochimaru somewhat resembled in methodology was B. The former two would give you a concept, and throw you to the proverbial wolves to figure it out, learning by doing and such. B had guided him along to learn how to be in harmony with Kurama, though he wondered half the time if the circumstances were what kept him so attentive as opposed to his own teaching practices. B seemed like he would have preferred to be writing up a song or something as opposed to lecturing. Orochimaru though was attentive to everything. The first thing he'd done with them was have them fight him. No ninjutsu or genjutsu allowed, just pure taijutsu. They hadn't touched him, of course, that wasn't the purpose. They fought him in hand-to-hand for several hours, with the snake occasionally pulling off some strange maneuver Naruto'd never even dreamed of to attack, or forcing them to break away from standard academy taijutsu. As he was fighting them, Orochimaru broke down absolutely every aspect of their physical makeup, fighting preferences, every tell that they had, how they leaned, where they looked, what they tried to do by instinct, whether it was block, dodge or counter. He catalogued and then informed them of what he'd seen later, when they'd been eating their lunch. The first thing I'll do with you two is teach you both a new taijutsu style. The academy basics are a one-size-fits-all form that is there out of necessity. Now that you are my soldiers, it is my job to hone you into the weapons you will one day become. And the first step is learning how to win at a simple fist fight. Ryoko had questioned him on such. Everyone knew that out of the two remaining Sannin, Orochimaru was by far the most well-versed in the arts of ninjutsu. A ninja's life is measured in the chakra he has. For most this means that once they've run out of this precious resource they might as well be dead. Even a shinobi several times weaker, or even a simple samurai, could end their lives with little more than a knife. Before I teach either of you how to spend your own share of this precious resource, I will first teach you to turn the knife against that weaker shinobi, how to defend yourself and ultimately kill whatever wishes to turn you into prey with your bare hands. As my soldiers, you are reflections of myself. and I will not be found wanting by having one of you die to a simple brigand with a good sword arm. The very next day, he'd brought them both scrolls for stretches and exercises that had to be completed every morning before training, and every week he would test them to see how well they could pull their respective exercises off. If they failed, well, let's just say they didn't exactly want a repeat performance and leave it at that. Training consisted of drills. Every day over and over they would do a variety of physical exercises from running to push-ups to crunches and so on, followed by the early katas of their taijutsu styles, with one Orochi leading Ryoko and the other helping Naruto. Ryoko's style, from what Naruto could gather, was fast, using quick hand strikes, ones that could easily incorporate kyune, or shuriken held in the hands, and flexibility to avoid or absorb attacks as opposed to a more meat and potatoes blocking punching. He vaguely wondered if it was the so-called snake style and that she'd learn to eventually seize openings and exploit pressure points and such. With him, however, it would still be a great number of years before he was anywhere near a physical capacity to go pound for pound with a full-grown civilian, let alone a shinobi. So his style was focused on kicks and knives. The leg, of course, being far larger than the fist, also carried the most amount of power and reach, something he sorely lacked. The only thing he was using his hands for was the occasional block and the acrobatic dodge. The entire style revolved around quick footwork and powerful chakra-enhanced blows. The knives came into play when he grappled. Given his small size, it wasn't out of the question for him to nimbly latch onto a whole limb, be it a leg or an arm. Where most fighters could take these limbs and break them through sheer brute power, he could just latch onto them like a gnat and keep cutting till he disabled the limb, or hit something vital. And given the amount of veins and arteries present in the hips, legs, arms and biceps, killing a man who overextended his punch wouldn't take very long. He kept on insisting ninjutsu would level the playing field even further, but the snake was flatly refusing, even sabotaging his and Ryoko's own efforts to go to the Konoha library and find some stuff for themselves. Somehow he'd gotten Jiji to sign an order for the employees to not let either of them into the shinobi sections of the library. He didn't even know such an order existed, so in that aspect at least he could take some petty satisfaction at calling the Sannin a prick in this regard. Still didn't change the fact that he was cut off from any easy ninjutsu sources. He would practice some of his own techniques privately if he ever had a private moment, where Kakashi-sensei was no longer watching him during days, because he was training with the snake, and Chan still watched him at night. While he kinda liked the faceless woman, she was really killing any opportunity he might have had to be discreet. Hey, the blonde looked up, finding the grey-haired Ryoko standing at the road ahead. Oh hey, he greeted with a smile. You're up earlier than usual, she shrugged, or you just slept in later than usual. Come on, let's walk. They made their way down the road, the early morning cold finally dissipating to make way for the sun's warmth. So he ventured by way of conversation. When do you think we'll get a mission? It's almost been 2 months. D ranks sucked, but at least now, knowing what to expect, he could take some vindictive pleasure in watching Ryoko's reaction to the news that their missions would be little more than chores people were too lazy to do themselves. Dunno. When he's happy with our taijutsu, I guess, she answered, lacing her hands back behind her head as she strolled along. It sucks that he's not teaching us any ninjutsu though. I mean, what kinda ninja can you be with just the academy stuff under your belt? I know this Uchiha kid, younger than me by a year, and he can already spit fireballs. I wanna burn annoying people too. She seemed to smile in delight at the prospect. Naruto's sweet dropped a bit at that. When they arrived, Orochimaru, as usual, was already there waiting for them. It was with some surprise though that they took notice of someone else. Naruto, Ryoko, he said by way of greeting, not even lifting his eyes from the paper scroll he was unfurling in one hand and refurling in the other as he read it. Meet your new teammate, Kyofu. She was a tall girl, older than both of them easy, dark purple hair that trailed down towards her lower back in a straight cascade, mocha skin, gained some ancestry from Kumogakure. It was a stark contrast to Ryoko's silver grey, Anko-like style. Naruto would say she was, if not 15, then very close to it. Now his lack of age was even more apparent, as was his rather obvious height challenge. He could barely even reach Kyofu's stomach right now. It was stupid to be irritated at that, given that he graduated at barely 6, but there it was. Still, he decided to try breaking the ice a bit. Hi there, he said with a little forced cheer as he extended his hand. She smiled politely, taking his hand, though the hesitation was evident. Uzumaki-san, I presume? I heard you were young, but your introductions can be done later, Orochimaru interrupted neutrally, rolling the scroll closed and tying both rolls together with a rope. Today will begin your chakra control training. You're one step closer to the lauded field ninjutsu with this. Why can't you just give us something? Ryoko complained. The other teams have already learned. I don't care what the other teams have learned or not learned, the pale man interrupted. You are a team, he stressed. You will learn at the same pace and will function entirely as a team, as a single entity, not 3. Your skills must be to par with each other to cover the weaknesses of each other. He paused for a moment, either to gather his thoughts, or to allow his words a moment to sink in. You are genin. As such you are expected to work with others, because your weaknesses are evident and substantial, and will continue to be such well into the rank of chunin, where you will still perform the function as a piece of a greater fighting body. Only when you become jounin, will you be trusted to complete objectives alone, and even then you will function as a leader, not an independent entity. The same is true of even the Anbu Corps. Only Hunter Nin can work solo, Naruto muttered to himself, but in the empty clearing he was heard easily by the others, with Ryoko and Kyofu throwing a quick look his way at the sound of his voice, before returning their eyes to Orochimaru. And you are all a far cry from being Hunter Nin, he finished. Now if there are no further complaints, we will begin our exercises -0. So how long have you been a genin? Ryoko asked as they sat in a semicircle. About 3 or 4 hours later they were eating some toilet paper tasting rations, dry as bone meal with some lukewarm water. It didn't take Naruto long to get used to them again. She still made a face though, and Kyofu had seemed as surprised as either of them had been before. She too scrunched up her face like she'd just been punched in the throat. The raven-haired girl coughed, drinking greedily to wet her dry as sandpaper throat. 3 years now. My teammates managed to pass our second try for the Chunin exams. I was injured and couldn't keep going halfway through the test. Clearly it hurt her pride to admit as much. When are the next exams? Naruto cut in, his voice eager, a strange glint in his eye. A serpentine gaze took note of that detail. In about 5 more months if I'm not mistaken, she answered with a shrug. I've been on the reserves list for about a year, so I haven't been following. 10 minutes, Oro called out, warning them of the impending end of the break and the fact that they would soon have to get ready to continue their exercises. As tasteless as the damn things were, Naruto and Ryoko had learned quick enough to scarf them down before time was up. Luckily Kyofu followed their example. -0. It was approaching sunset when Orochimaru let them go. The evening sky lit up with the flares of orange and purples as the sun dipped below the horizon. That was pretty intense, their latest addition groused, wincing a bit with each step. We get to do it again tomorrow, Ryoko hissed, rubbing her stomach where her abs were currently making their displeasure known. Getting the concept of tree walking down had largely lost its luster when the Sannin demanded they each do a set of 30 crunches while hanging upside down from the tree, their feet to the branches and heads to the ground. The pain had largely fractured her delicate knowledge of chakra control. Naruto and Kyofu had managed to hold themselves up though, much to her irritation. Naruto nodded. With 5 months left before the next exams, it was likely that they would get to ninjutsu by then, which was a serious supplement he needed to his punching power no matter what taijutsu style Orochimaru was trying to drill into. He paused, his heightened senses of the diluted nature chakra rushing through his coils, going off like a flare in his thoughts. There was a very familiar presence just a little ways off to the side. He grinned like a Cheshire cat. I'll see you guys in a bit, he said quickly before swiftly swiveling around on his heel to head down a different road. What was that about? Kyofu questioned with a raised eyebrow. Ryoko shrugged. How should I know? Naruto meanwhile, very nearly seemed to slither between the people of the late evening, coiling through them like a bloodhound on a mission as he honed in on the presence that had caught his attention. He walked up to a raven-haired woman wearing a red and black hakama and hori, examining a piece of fruit on the market stand. He smiled as he walked up behind her. "En-chan," he cried exuberantly, as loud and high-pitched as his 6-year-old voice allowed. The woman seemed to straighten before slowly turning around, one eyebrow hooked high on her forehead. "Naruto-kun," she said, onyx black eyes showing little surprise outside of the initial stiffening of her shoulders. Naruto grinned in response, quickly coming to 3 conclusions. 1. She was young, well younger than he thought she'd be. In fact he'd say she may just be at Kyofu's age, though she was an inch or 2 taller, which with the mask and voice muffling had probably attributed for her to seem like she was already in her 20s or so. 2. You're pretty, he exclaimed, as blunt and truthful now as he'd always been. The eyebrow arched up just a little further and a seldom-seen smirk graced her features. "Thank you," she said with just the slightest inflection in her tone to note her approval of the compliment. "Perhaps someday I'll say the same to you." Naruto smiled, happy at that he'd gotten her to joke, even if it was a little at his expense. And Chan was just so serious all the time. And 3, she was definitely familiar. He had seen her before, but for the life of him he just couldn't recall where. It was infuriating, like something just on the tip of your tongue or the edge of thought. She hadn't been an enemy, he knew that much. He could remember all the enemies, especially those he'd had to put down more than once. So who in the hell was Schnee-san? Another voice cried out and Naruto turned to look only to freeze in place. Running towards them was a mini Sasuke. Naruto's eyes darted from his one-time friend and rival onto En-chan and back, his mind quickly forming conclusions that just as rapidly felt as though they were crashing into sudden brick walls, grinding every thought to a blindingly fast halt.
No way, Atauto, she said, kneeling down to be at eye level with her, now confirmed younger brother as he came in close. He could almost hear the crashing sound every upper cognitive function made when Sasuke stood in front of her, holding out a Kyune pouch. Itachi-ne, can we get these? The little Sasuke asked, smiling as Itachi took the pouch in her hand. We can, she assured before handing it to him, but first you have to give it back. Technically, you just stole old man Ichisu's merchandise, Atauto, she chided, jerking her head to indicate a somewhat irritated-looking stall clerk. Sasuke blushed, nodding. Before he left though he looked behind her. Who's he? Itachi turned as she spoke. This is. She paused at the sight of him. Naruto was an expressive child, but as expressive as he was, one of the things she'd yet to see on his face was terror. It was plain as day to see on his face now. He was pale as a ghost, his pupils had narrowed down into pinpricks. She caught twitches in his fingers, twitches that she could almost suspect to be quick draw motions, a reflex, but that shouldn't be possible at his age. Uzumaki Naruto, she finished, standing up to her full height and keeping her eyes on the boy. Before she could fully gather her thoughts, Sasuke, normally a reserved child, stepped forward, oblivious to the myriad of emotions playing behind Naruto's eyes. Hi, Uchiha Sasuke, he extended his hand. Naruto seemed to snap out of whatever dazed stupor he found himself in fast enough to plaster on a brittle glass smile as he extended his hand to shake Sasuke's. Uzumaki Naruto, future Hokage, he announced loudly. Hokage. He's never expressed an interest in such a thing before. She saw Sasuke opening his mouth to speak when she clamped her hand down on his shoulder, bringing his attention up to her. Go, she demanded gently, a subtle jinjutsu layered into her words to make him more compliant. I'll get you the Kyune in a bit, but give them back before Ichisu calls the police in on you. He nodded. See you later then, Naruto-san, he called as he walked away. She was startled when Naruto immediately turned to leave as though there was a lash at his back. She grabbed at his arm, and when he turned, there was no mistake in her eyes, and she saw his fingers reach for a Kyune pouch that was not there and his hand strike with empty fingers at what would have been the artery along her left inner bicep. There was no wild flailing, no wasted movements. Had that hand been armed and had she been anyone else, he would have cut her and made an escape before anyone was the wiser. That was an assassin's strike. She gripped his arm harder, now holding him still. With quick, subtle trickery, she ensnared those within the vicinity in an illusion, forming a clone to take her place as she vanished with her nighttime charge. Whomever was nosy enough to keep watching, believing that she had just sent Naruto off and turned to buy the goods with her sibling. In reality, she appeared 2 blocks away, on one of the higher rooftops for some semblance of privacy as she let Naruto, who'd been tugging against her, go. The frightened Genin looked around, beginning to hyperventilate as his movements became slightly erratic. Naruto, Naruto, she called twice as he didn't respond to the first. Can you hear me? Do you know where you are? Where he pants, his breathing is wild, the blood thunders through his temples, drowning out the sound as his heart pounds and pounds and pounds like it's about to burst in his chest. We're in the marshes of Kusa. It's a skirmish. Wait, was it? Yes. I'm fighting in the rear guard, a fighting retreat. Sakura is up ahead, leading the wounded. She is right, or is she dead already? No, she dies, later. Sasuke's with me, or is it B? I can't remember. We're fighting what was once the shod-aimed Sachikage's elite bodyguard Anbu. We're fighting back to back, but the mud is slick. Sasuke falls, or was it B? I go to pick him up, he gives me his hand. Someone grabs my arm. I turn, bury the Kyune into the artery with an explosive note. It goes off, takes the arm with it. It doesn't hurt me, Kurama helps with that. And then we're in Konoha and Chan, he answers, smiling. I can see Gigi's face, he points, her eyes narrow, leery. What happened down there? Down where? His eyes are still erratic, his heart is hammering beneath his breast so hard it hurts, but he's perfected this mask. An old well-worn friend, you could say. She's not fully buying it though. What she'd seen couldn't just be wiped away. Did you remember something, or think you remembered something? There is screaming, and blood. I remember that. The smell most of all. The sting of iron will never. Maybe. He scrunches up his nose. What are we doing up here? Weren't we in the market with your little brother? Yes we were. She nods. What's the last thing you remember? Sasuke's name, he smiled. I remember Sasuke's name. A smile made of brittle, cracking glass. Naruto's always been a very expressive boy. She finds it unnerving then, that she can't read him right now.
The one thing that hit him after he'd had time to calm down and recover from the shock of everything was a rather innocuous thing when taken into consideration on the grand scheme of implications. Itachi's present condition translated to, it could have been the fact that this meant any number of his friends could now be different genders. It could have been the fact that now, Some people might not even be born at all if, say, the person's mother turned out to be a man and the father stayed a man. No amount of time-bending BS could ever recreate the genetic mix that had created them. It could even have been the fact that the Itachi he had known, or anyone he had known, might have some fundamental differences that were absolutely beyond his control. If their genders could be switched around at the drop of a hat, why not their personalities, their outlook? Who's to say Itachi wasn't a psychopath this time, or that Hinata wouldn't be shy, or that Ino wouldn't be bossy? Tsunade had changed due to cause and effect, Jiraiya dead, Dan alive, so there was a reason here, it just was. But that wasn't what hit him hardest out of this whole thing. If anything, it had been a passing thought. If it was that way, there was hardly anything he could do about it. He'd just have to roll with the punches as they came. If any of those things came to pass, he'd have to grin and bear it, so to speak. So no, that wasn't his biggest concern. What hit him the hardest was the realization that he actually found Itachi pretty. Now Naruto had a difficult job. At the age of 16, now 18, if one added the years he's been living his new life, he'd killed more people than most men killed in their entire lifetimes. But that doesn't change the fact that, from a maturity standpoint, he was still very much a young man, wholly inexperienced with the nuances of life outside of his duty. So this realization brought forward a very important personal question in his mind. Does this make me gay? And this was the cause of his current state, sitting on his bed glaring out his window as the gears in his head ground on squeaky, rust-covered hinges. To try and answer this, most pertinent of life's questions, he was so focused on his thoughts on this he actually jumped when he felt a tap against his shoulder. Turning around, he was surprised to find his team standing in his living room. "Ha, what are you guys doing here?" he blinked owlishly. "It's 1 o'clock. You're over 3 hours late," Orochimaru drawled. "Care to explain? It's daytime." Naruto blinked and it almost looked like he'd just come to the realization that it was, in fact, daytime. "What the hell were you doing?" Ryoko asked, crossing her arms. Naruto opened his mouth to answer when he thought better of it. "I was contemplating the universe." The looks his team threw at him were just priceless. The snake shook his head first. "We're late enough as it is. Get yourself ready and let's get to training." His words brought another impending little worry that had been nagging Naruto for a few weeks now. "Actually," he ventured carefully, "we need to take some missions." Orochimaru rounded on him. "I'm sorry, I believe I'm the one who decides what this team does or does not do." "Fine," Naruto drawled. "Then decide where exactly I'm going to get the money to pay my bills next month." The Sannin opened his mouth then snapped it shut. "Since I became a genin, I don't get any more money from the village programs. I've been living off my savings for the last 2 months, but by next month I'll be in the red. We have to take some." He paused, almost cringing at the word. "D ranks in order for me to get some money?" "We are not taking D ranks," Orochimaru hissed, and the snake actually looked dangerous, like the Orochimaru he'd been expecting for months now. Kyofu's eyes glimmered with adoration for her new sensei. "We're not," he shook his head. If there was one person that hated D rank assignments more than Orochimaru, that person had yet to be found. "How much do you need?" "Well, with the rent it's never mind," he dismissed with a shake of his head. "I'll dump 60,000 into your account by week's end." Naruto's eyes bulged out of his sockets. "See 60 shit, we need money too," Ryoko snapped, gesturing to herself and the shocked Kyofu. "Toss some this way, old man." The pale Sannin rubbed a migraine forming between his eyes. -0, you want to run that by me again? Sarutobi blinked, curious. "He did what?" The Uchiha princess shrugged. "If I had to liken it to anything, I would describe it as being caught in a flashback. He acted without even thinking, didn't seem to register anything, and he made a motion that, as an attack, would have been a killing blow. What you're describing is an extreme case of post-traumatic stress we normally see in long-time veterans, not fresh genin. You assigned me to him because of how someone managed to alter or fabricate memories. Who's to say that this wasn't one of those fabrications? It might very well be so. But the fact is, none of us can prove that, and Inoichi has never been able to mind-walk him after that event. What you're asking for is extreme enough. Without proof, there is no justification for taking him off the genin roster and putting him under observation, especially when the one person that could do this efficiently, Inoichi, has already said that this case is the exception to the norm. I know what I saw. I would have been able to react in time to save myself had he been armed. But imagine if this would grip him with one of his fellow genin. It came completely without warning, no trigger that I could tell. He could very much kill one of, or both. Sarutobi shook his head. I understand the concern, and I'm inclined to believe you. But again, you have no evidence but your suspicion. I'll inform Orochimaru and emphasize his need to observe Naruto more closely. If he finds anything amiss, then we have more grounds to act, but for now I have no real grounds to remove him as a genin. She nodded. I understand. She stood bowing respectfully. I'll keep my eyes on him for a while longer with your permission. You were supposed to be reassigned months ago. 2 years with no incident. You and Kakashi are some of my best, and it's a waste of resources. It's been a waste of resources for a year now. I've kept you on because I felt you needed the vacation. It will be on my own time, she assured. The old man let out a breath through his nostrils. Tell you what, I'll let you stay on his detail until the Chunin examinations. At that point Orochimaru should train them to be sufficiently strong enough to compete and Naruto won't need you as his protector anymore. I thought the exam applications wouldn't be open for another month. We haven't even found out where they're going to be held. You really think Orochimaru isn't going to get those kids ready just to show up everyone else? He deadpanned. The door suddenly opened much to the protests of his secretary and both of the room's occupants looked and found that speaking of the devil, did indeed make him appear. Orochimaru and his team marched into the Hokage's office. The two girls looked stiff and nervous. Naruto followed easily. Sarutobi leaned back in his chair. Itachi's eyes found Naruto, who tensed a little at the sight of her before offering a smile and a wave. She eyed him for a moment, almost checking to see if all was well, before nodding in greeting. To what do I owe the pleasure? Sarutobi asked as he began to light the tobacco in his pipe. After much debate on the state of my own bank account and rapidly diminishing sense of charity, I've decided we need a C-rank mission. Hopefully one a little on the high end. Payment-wise, you're asking for a C rank and you've yet to take a single D rank assignment in nearly 3 months since this team was formed, partially formed. We only acquired our latest member less than a day ago, which means the teamwork on this team is handicapped until she acclimatizes, which D ranks are meant to do. D ranks are plebeian assignments made by people too lazy or busy to cut their own lawn. She's an experienced genin, already participated in a Chunin examination. Naruto and Ryoko have been teammates for several months. Ryoko's shown aptitude for teamwork and personal sacrifice in her genin examination. There's no reason for you to avoid the D ranks I've been looking to paste you with since I heard you wanted a team. Now the old man was grinning smugly. Orochimaru snarled, "You've been dreaming of this, haven't you?" With a huge smile on my face, the sadistic pleasure was almost palpable. The Sannin worked his jaw, staring into the old man's eyes as if he was willing him to burst into flames. All right, what the hell do I have to do to get out of this? Sarutobi rocked in his chair, looking for all the world like a gentle lounging old man. Nothing, I just really want to see you slog through these plebeian assignments, he smiled. How about I owe you a favor? You still owed Tsunade too. She hasn't banked them, and that's not even relevant. Okay, I'll tell you what, I'm, quite frankly, dying for a vacation. I'll give you your C rank. In exchange, after these next Chunin exams, I go off on a sabbatical for a week or 2 or 3. Tsunade will be left in charge and you will do absolutely everything she says during that time to help her out. Shouldn't she be banking on her favors for that? He asked. She'd try, he said, raising his hands in a shrug, but by the time she gets everything sorted, realizes and is willing to admit she needs help, my vacation will be done or you'll have skipped town on some pretense or other. You know, between you and her I'm gonna get a complex that no one trusts me around here. We know you better than that. He smiled, pulled out a scroll and tossed it. Orochimaru eyed it and felt his lips curl in distaste. Sarutobi chuckled. Yes, I recall what wonders it does to your skin, my boy. -0. A few days later they were standing on a sand dune, while all of them wore some desert-adequate clothes, heavy cloaks, light colors and such. One of them, Kyofu, was blinking at a body huddled beneath layers of heavy cloth. Truth be told, if not for the eyes peeking out from under them, it would look like a mound of discarded fabric. They could barely make out the shape of a human body under there. You're being ridiculous, you know, the mocha-skinned girl drawled. Orochimaru ignored her and kept walking. Kyofu heard her teammates muttering behind her and looked to see Naruto and Ryoko's faces twisted with malicious glee. She didn't know the whole story and didn't really want to. Something about their genin test that the two were still looking to get payback for. Evidently, the fact that Orochimaru loathed the Suna Desert because of the sun, and the sand and the heat was going to be used at some point during this mission to help get said payback. You know, she ventured, if you do end up screwing with him, he'll just take it out on us in training later. Don't care. Ryoko laughed. It'll be worth it, Naruto agreed. Personally, she wasn't going anywhere near this with a 10-foot pole. -0. All right, the mound of cloth spoke up later that night, as they camped by one of the way stations that led into Suna. Several merchants circled the lake like a bazaar lineup. Suna didn't have a system of roads, of course. Sand was too unstable a foundation, so they made do with way stations and supply depots in the desert oases that provided for travelers heading in and out of the village nearly for free. Since said travelers were usually caravaneers, tradesmen, or most importantly clients, the visitors mostly ended up reimbursing the village at least double the food and supplies consumed on average. The three genin turned their eyes towards their robed sensei. All genin teams, he began, hold a basic makeup in general. One genin who is strongest in taijutsu, close-range combat, one who is strongest in ninjutsu, long-range combat, and one who is strongest in jinjutsu, a support role. It generally has to be that way. You're too young and too unskilled to be considered adequate at more than a single field, generally. I refuse to let that be the case on this team. What do you mean? Kyofu asked, taking a bite of some of the cooked meat Orochimaru had bought from the suppliers. Ryoko and Naruto have been training their physical aptitude in taijutsu styles these last few months. You haven't since I recruited you recently. They're both adequate in taijutsu, enough to face any other genin at least. Yeah, you could talk about us like we're not sitting right here, Ryoko muttered. The Sannin pressed on, ignoring her. None of you will be learning the Jinjutsu arts yet. Out of all fields it is the most difficult to master, despite being arguably the most powerful. I will only teach you in so far as to detect and dispel it. The bulk of your training for the next 2 months will be ninjutsu starting tomorrow. Yes, sweet. The silver-haired girl shouted, startling a few nearby. Naruto held the barest hint of a smile. Sit, he demanded, pulling out slips of paper from the many folds of cloth. He held them out and the kids could see his hand was covered in a thick glove. How the man wasn't suffocating in there was anyone's guess. Naruto, though, recognized them immediately. Element tags. In order to diversify your arsenal of available techniques, the Sannin drawled, I will teach each of you elemental manipulation. Hopefully you'll each have 3 distinct affinities. What's all that mean? Ryoko asked. I heard of it. Kyofu took one. Elemental manipulation is pretty advanced though, isn't it? You're my soldiers. The snake drawled again. You're a reflection of me. As such I expect more of you. You'll learn this, or nothing at all. Now, each one of you take a slip and channel chakra into it once I tell you. They reached into his hand and took one of the small squares of paper. Everyone has an elemental affinity or 2 if they're lucky. Elemental affinities are oftentimes inherited. Depending on whose genes are stronger, you're likely to have that parent's affinity, or that of your grandparents in rare occasions. Sometimes, both your mother and your father's genes are balanced well enough to have both affinities. Though this is a rare case and mainly happens in bloodlines, since some bloodlines require an absolutely perfect balance of elements to form a third, something impossible without the adequate genetic makeup. Kyofu, let's see you first. The mocha-skinned girl nodded, and with a burst of chakra, the paper began to crumble to bits of dust from one tip, and the other began to smoke and burn. 2. Earth and fire, a powerful combination with practice. Ryoko, the younger female of the team, looked excited as she stared at the slip of paper that split cleanly in half. A wind element. It's rare in Konoha. It is the most defense-oriented of the 5 elements. The girl was beaming. Naruto the blonde channeled chakra into his slip, already knowing it would split in half. To his utter shock, once it split, one piece of the paper crumbled to dust, the other became soggy and brittle with wetness. He froze. Orochimaru actually pulled off the hood of his robes, leaned forward and yanked his hand towards him. Gah. Hey, that's not possible. If ever there was a moment Orochimaru looked like he'd been smacked across the face, this was pretty much it. Maybe the paper's busted, Ryoko ventured, leaning over Naruto's hand as well, now forming a miniature huddle with her sensei. The Sannin looked at her before reaching into his pack. He ripped off a piece of a paper scroll and, on the spot, made another makeshift seal note. Do it again, he demanded. Naruto took the thing and repeated the action without much fuss. Truth be told, he was curious too. Just like before, a split down the middle with one half crumbling to dust and the last becoming soggy. Well gee, aren't you special, Ryoko muttered. So, what does this mean, sensei? Kyofu questioned. Naruto looked up in askance as well, all eyes turning to him. Orochimaru stayed quiet for a long moment. I haven't the faintest idea. It may have been the very first time he ever admitted such. -0 a day or so later, they were within Tsunagakure's walls, and as they marched towards the tower, Naruto's eyes were looking everywhere. His wandering gaze was noticed by Orochimaru, but he looked little different than his 2 teammates who were avidly taking in the sights, so he paid it no never mind. Unfortunately, Naruto didn't really see much of anything or anyone of interest before they arrived and were made to wait, and wait, and wait. Ugh, this is boring, Ryoko hissed out for the 10th time. Practice your meditation, Orochimaru drawled as an answer. Oh come on, Naruto joined, once more deciding to try and get the snake to budge. It's not like you need us here to deliver the reports. You can do that yourself. I could, he admitted, but your suffering brings me joy. It was more disturbing how toneless he made that sound rather than the actual words. How about you at least let us go out and practice the basics of element manipulation, Ryoko ventured. It would be more productive than just sitting here and complaining, Sensei Kyofu piped up. The gold eyes looked out from under the hood as if he was wondering if they actually thought him to be that stupid. I'm giving you 1/2 of an hour. Go out, take a look around and return within that time. If you do not, I will find you. Once that happens you will not sleep tonight. I will force you to march all day tomorrow carrying thrice the weight you carried today. Am I making myself clear? Despite the rebuke, the 3 genin nodded, with Kyofu taking the extra step of setting her watch on a timer.
Go then, he waved them away. -0. It was a monumental display of quiet restraint that kept Naruto walking with his team, as opposed to rushing across the village, scouring every nook and cranny for Gaara, Temari or Kankuro. He wanted to look for them, to see that they were okay, but there were just so many things that he could change that might change them. He didn't want that. He wanted them as close to the friends he had as he could get, and his friends hadn't met him when they were 6 or 7. He could change them, and who's to say that change would be for the better? No, better to stay away. They might be hurting now with the way Gaara couldn't control his sand, or killed people, but he could help him later just like he helped him before, and their friendship could build off of the same foundation it had originally, that had made it so strong. Staying away was for the best. As fragile as his knowledge of the future was, with all the changes that were already evident just as a fallout to coming back in the first place, he had to believe that some things could be predicted. Otherwise, what real chance did he have of stopping Toby now than he had before? In the future where he had Kurama's help, he had to believe, at least a little bit, that some things would hold true. Hey, hurry up, short stuff. He looked up. Ryoko and Kyofu had pulled ahead of him. Yeah, he sighed miserably. Yeah, I'm coming. Something bothering you, Naruto-san? Nah, he smiled as he caught up. Just thinking about some stuff back home I gotta get to. Need any help? She asked. Nah, he thought of something. Hey, you guys wanna get something to eat? He was about to blurt out that he knew of a great sushi bar Temari had shown him, when he bit his tongue at the last minute. As long as it's quick, Ryoko agreed. I'd rather not find out if the old man was dead set on that time limit. What's up with that anyway? Suna's our ally, so why is he so paranoid? Don't you remember that Suna fought against us during the war? Tsunade-sama's reputation as a medic was born from her ability to counter Suna's poisons, especially those of Chiyo-san, their greatest puppet master at the time. Kyofu answered easily. Oh yeah, the younger girl said, thinking, guess that would entitle him to hold a bit of a grudge. -0. That night they stayed within the village walls in adjoining rooms. The genin had the room beside their senseis to sleep in, but for the time being they were all in Orochimaru's room, all three practicing their elemental manipulation before going off to sleep as the Sannin read from another scroll. This one he'd picked up from Suna's library. Kyofu was trying to burn a piece of paper between her hands, rubbing them together to help with the heat. It was supposed to help according to the snake. Ryoko and Naruto were struggling to split leaves. Actually, Ryoko was struggling. Naruto was holding back to not make her feel bad, being the only one of the team with a single element. To see him master it with such supreme ease to boot would have made him feel like crap if the shoe was on the other foot, so he was holding back a bit for now. He'd make sure to get it down privately. He could do it, but his control was a little off. The cut wasn't quite as clean as he could once make it. Still, the three elements thing had thrown him for a loop, to say the least. Orochimaru had vowed to look into it the second they were back in the village and would be informing the Hokage along with the rest of the team. Naruto wasn't sure what would be the fallout of this, apparently huge, thing, but the next few months would prove to be very interesting to say the least. -0. It was 3 days later that Orochimaru found himself sitting in Sarutobi's office, his genin standing behind him. Come again. The Sandaime pushed his reading glasses up the bridge of his nose before deciding against it and pulling them off to look at the 4. Naruto has 3 chakra affinities, the Sannin drawled. Did I stutter? The old man glared. If this is another of your jokes, it's not, he interrupted before gesturing to the boy behind him. See for yourself. The god of shinobi looked as though he couldn't decide whether to take him up on his offer for the elation of it actually being true, or fear of the disappointment, followed shortly by irritation. If it turned out to just be some elaborate joke, then he pushed back his chair. Come here, Neru-chan. I'm not for the blonde hissed as he marched forward, ignoring the snickering of his teammates. Sarutobi didn't answer, rummaging through his desk before finally giving up and drawing the seal himself on a loose piece of paper, a whole sheet to make sure there were no mistakes. He handed it to the blonde leaning back in his chair. Now, do what you did with Oro-kun. Naruto gripped the page in one hand and channeled chakra into it. It split, soaked and crumbled. Sarutobi looked about ready to have a coronary. Would this be a bad time to mention that I've decided to nominate my team for the upcoming Chunin exams to be held in Iwagakure? The serpent drawled, and this time, the old man choked on the tobacco smoke as 3 children swiveled their heads around to look at the snake in some surprise. One though crossed their minds. Iwa.
No, the man said, pacing the room. No, yes, you mentioned that, the other said in a lazy drawl, smirking as he watched the elder pace the room like a caged animal, looking for all the world like he wanted to hit him for being so glib. Are you crazy? Or is it your personal job in life to assure I suffer a migraine every day? There were few times the famed god of shinobi could ever have been said to have lost his temper or raised his voice, but right now his voice was barely an octave below shouting. Maybe my need to give you a permanent migraine has driven me crazy, and now he figured he should really stop before Sarutobi decided one surviving student was enough for his tastes. He opened his mouth then closed it,
deciding to think a little more before he'd speak this time. What exactly is your objection? He figured he could get Sarutobi to line up the proverbial ducks for him to shoot down, but perhaps he should have chosen his words a bit better if the look of murder the old man was throwing him could be taken as an indication. My objection, he spat, is that you're nominating team for the Chunin exams that barely has a week's time together as a whole team. My objection is that, not only by your reports, but the Genin's statements, you've nominated them while only having taught them physical and chakra control exercises. My objection is that they've barely learned any team formations or jutsu since leaving the academy. My objection is that, despite these things, not only did you decide to go forward and nominate them for an exam by all accounts they seem woefully prepared for, but that you've decided to drag them cross-country to the single most hostile neighbor we have that's just as likely to try stabbing you and your students on sight as opposed to letting you into the gates. In order to do it, well, if you're willing to say to hell with the treaty and host an independent exam here, I'll be more than happy to stop treating this like a joke. The snake let his mouth close, though the smile still remained. All right then, he began. First, the team barely has a week's time together. This is true, but that's only true in terms of Kyofu. Naruto and Ryoko have been teammates for the full time the team has been in existence, and Kyofu is adjusting well to them and they to her. 3 more months, which is about as much time as we have before the exams, should be enough to finish that. He moved to continue before Sarutobi could start again. I've taught them taijutsu and assured that they can easily overpower any genin in a hand-to-hand fight. Ninjutsu comes now. As I said, we still have 3 months time to get their skills to a level that is adequate. Add to that 2 wind elements powering up a fire jutsu and most teams they face will be overwhelmed from that alone. The team formations and attack patterns they'll get from practicing their jutsu and taijutsu with me, it'll sharpen their focus, their hand-seal speed and coordination. They'll learn it quickly because with the physical exercises I've put them through before this, would already condition their bodies to handle extensive periods of strenuous activity. As for I were letting us in through the gate, they can no more violate the treaty than you can without alienating any cooperation from any of the other villages. Ryautenbin would destroy himself economically. You're not going. The old man's response was flat. You're being overdramatic, the Sanin drawled, and you're getting on my nerves. Now get out. And if I catch one whiff of this stupidity again, you don't wanna know all the hell I'll bring down on you. You don't get to play with the lives of your students just to up your own reputation. I know you get off on strutting around like you're smarter than the rest of the world, but I thought I taught you better than that. The Sanin huffed through his nostrils, closing his eyes. Fine. Just like that he stood and marched out of the office. Saru watched him leave, knowing his student far better than that. That had been far too easy. He was planning something else. He just couldn't figure out what that something was. -0. The answer came to him a month later in the form of a letter. It hit him like a brick. It was a letter from the daimyo of Hinokuni, one that expressed his own personal excitement at the news that Orochimaru had not only taken a team, but was nominating them for the exams in Iowa. One that also expressed the daimyo's plans, that he would be traveling to view these exams personally in order to give a full show of support for the participating genin, and for the death dealer of the last Great War. One that assured the Sandaime that, given the impossibility of his own attendance to the exams, the daimyo would do everything in his considerable power to make certain Iwagakure did not try anything untoward against the genin, or their sensei. He forced himself to sit in his office and wait for the anger to subside. And yes, that was putting it lightly. When he finally pulled himself to his feet, he told his secretary to postpone everything for an hour, signaled his guard detail to stay out of earshot, then he marched himself across the village towards the training ground, taking deep breaths of his pipe as he nodded at the passerbys that greeted him. Soon enough he made it to the training grounds, where already he could see the students working diligently on their chakra manipulation, with Naruto and Ryoko conversing, perhaps helping each other. They had forsaken splitting a leaf, having already done that, and had now been thrown headfirst into the deep end, with Orochimaru demanding of them to split a fist-sized rock, judging by the number of said stones scattered around them with gouges of varying length and depth carved into their surfaces. The eldest, Kyofu, was practicing a set of hand seals Sarutobi recognized as the Gokukaiu technique, one of the earliest and easiest fire techniques to wield. He found Orochimaru reading nearby. It was Ryoko that noticed him first. Whatever focus she had on splitting the rock abandoning her in the moment of surprise and splitting the air with the sound of grinding stone before she pulled her hand back to reveal several deep scratches to go with the thin coating of rock dust. Now on her hand, Hokage-sama, she gasped, bringing Naruto and Kyofu's attention back around towards him. Hokage-sama, Jijiak. The blonde got a smack on the back of his head. Orochimaru smiled. Sarutobi smiled at the children. I've just come to borrow your sensei for a moment. We have some issues to discuss. The Sanin rolled up his scroll, stood and began to march towards him, that ever-present smile still on his face. None of you are on break, keep practicing.
he demanded before marching up to Sarutobi's side. The old man turned and walked without a word. They were quite a distance away when Sarutobi finally came to a stop in a random place in the training grounds he deemed sufficiently isolated. You know, he began, speaking softly, eyes closed, mouth set in a grim, thin line. I don't set a great deal of rules here, especially not for you and Tsunade. I have a tendency to play favorites, that's always been one of my biggest problems. Oh, I never be. Quiet, the word was such a deadly hiss Orochimaru's mouth immediately snapped shut, and the ever-present grin fell off his features. Given that fact, maybe I was wrong in my thinking, Saru continued, but I believe that when the time comes that I do give you an order, make a demand, even a request, it's not entirely unreasonable to expect that order to be followed, distasteful as you might find it. He turned and looked at him for the first time in the conversation. Tell me, is that an unreasonable expectation, Orochimaru? No, it isn't. Evidently you've become rather apt at lying. The words were a growl, but Sarutobi's features never shifted from stern indifference. The younger man had nothing to say to that. There was a heavy silence between the two of them, and Sarutobi stared into Orochimaru's eyes, disapproval shining through every fiber of his being as he looked on the man with eyes the man could barely recognize, let alone stomach now that they were directed at him. Disappointment. You have your nomination, he drawled. You get to go to Iwa with the daimyo's delegation when they arrive. His voice never rose, it never seethed or hissed, but they were reverberating through him like a thunderstorm. If you never believe a single word I tell you, believe this: if anything happens to those children, if we lose any of them as shinobi, I'm holding you fully responsible. I'll strip you of your rank, and lock you into a cell for the next 10 years as a start. The Sannin tilted his head to the side a bit, the smile returning and staying there. And if they win? The disgust that decorated the older man's face was like a punch to the gut. That's all that ever matters to you, isn't it? Winning. Being better than everyone. That's not how the world works. It's always been how it works, he defended. We won the second and third wars by being better. We've remained the strongest of the 5 by being better. By winning, we lost Jiraiya because Hanzo was better than us. Individual strength is what carries a shinobi to his rank, his reputation, his prestige and his survival. It is how this world works. It's best that they learn that, and yet here you are standing on the shoulders of children to give some boost to your own. You're putting their lives at risk, and risking open war if something happens to the daimyo, to serve your ego. And it's sickening. The last word was said with palpable fury. Sickening or not, he shrugged. We're going. The old man squared his shoulders, lips pursed. For my part, I hope you find it worth it. You don't have to develop some complex about people not trusting you, because I'll tell you flatly that I don't trust you anymore. You've lost that privilege, the serpent blinked. Let me not waste any more of your precious time. You have 3 genin to get ready for an exam after all. To a passerby, those words were not laced with venom. To Orochimaru, they were dripping with it. Then he turned and began marching away, back towards his office. -0 you know. Now that we're practicing jutsu that are meant to be used as a team to overwhelm the opposition, we're going to have to start practicing some team formations, Kyofu said, gathering some of the Ichiraku noodles on her sticks. Doesn't that need practice, opponents? Ryoko asked as she noisily slurped down her own mouthful. MBRGHBS Naruto nodded, stuffing his face. They couldn't tell if it was agreement with either of them or a compliment to the chef. Sensei can make solid clones, she said. We'll have to rope him into it somehow. Maybe he can summon some of those snakes for practice too. The mocha-skinned girl smiled. It was no secret by now that one thing she was interested in the most was learning the summoning jutsu. It wasn't even the snakes she was particularly interested in. She was just fascinated with the fanciful stories that had wandered in her youth about the Yondaime and the Sannin charging into fierce battles on their legendary summoned beasts Manda, Katsuayo and Gamabunta. MBHR again, Naruto nodded. Hey, know what else we should do? Weapons. I heard Sensei's a master swordsman or something. He supposedly got this really strong sword. We should get him to teach us. We only have a few months though, Kyofu warned. That's not nearly enough time to learn kinjutsu enough to make a difference in the exams, I guess. Still should get him to teach us though. You haven't even mastered the elemental manipulation yet, Naruto reminded. She whirled and smacked him upside the head. Oh, so now we're articulate. And you're not much better, princess. Naruto smiled, rubbing the spot. It's true though. We have to get that down before anything. He corrected her assumption that he was at her level in that regard, but stopped himself. Yes, and if Naruto-san and I could have access to 2 affinities by the time the exams roll around, we'll have a much greater chance at winning with combination attacks and a more diverse array of tactics, Kyofu chimed in. Yeah, you got 3 to learn. Ryoko scratched at her chin, smirking. Better get on that with gift of nature. The blonde laughed nervously. That had hit a little too close to home. He'd thought long and hard about that little revelation during the Suna mission. More than that, he went and did some research, or tried to. Books were never his strong suit, but ultimately he came to a conclusion.
There was no natural way this could happen to anyone, so that just left some unnatural theories, two of which, Kurama and his jump, could be easily ruled out. Kurama hadn't gifted him with any chakra elements back in the original timeline, not even when they were friends, and even if this Kurama for whatever reason chose to do so or could, he was gone by the time the Naruto here was only 4 years old, a time period where, as a Jinchuriki, his coils were still adapting, contorting themselves as they grew with him to hold the demon. He didn't think it was likely that amongst all that chaos Kurama had managed to mutate him further with 2 extra affinities. As for him jumping back in time causing it, only his consciousness, or his soul, survived the journey. There was nothing physical that translated to this reality, so chakra and chakra affinities shouldn't have been a factor from the life he jumped from onto this one, or vice versa. So there was only one thing he could really think of, and it was the seal he'd stuck on his leg while he was still in the academy. The one that was like an IV drip of nature chakra into his system. Out of the 5 elements, what were the 3 most abundant in nature? Wind, earth and water. Nature chakra went into his system carrying those elements, then dispersed. And it's been doing that during the last stages of his chakra coil development, for quite some time now. So he'd unwittingly mutated himself, at least that was his thinking. He could almost hear Sakura's disapproving tone hovering behind him at his carelessness. -0 When Orochimaru opened the door to his apartment, he couldn't stop himself from rolling his eyes, a snarl curling up his lip. Don't you have someone to dissect and call it nurturing? Tsunade's stirring of her tea faltered for a moment before resuming. What crawled up your ass today? She questioned. She didn't know then. Nothing, he hissed. It's just been a long day. He stepped into his apartment, beginning to remove the kunai and shuriken pouches and setting them into their proper place. Does it have something to do with sensei going to see you? He sucked in a deep breath through his nostrils. Are you playing coy to drag this out, Haim? That's not your style. Well, truth be told, she took another sip of her tea. I'm not sure what happened. 1 minute I'm in my office, next thing I know someone's telling me sensei marched up looking like he wanted a new snakeskin wallet. He looked at her. Come on, she shrugged. You know how this works. Whenever me or Jiraiya got into a fight with sensei, one of the Anbu on sensei's detail would come to the 2 of us not involved in the fight to help, or whenever we were fighting each other someone would go to sensei. The Anbu do a lot more than keep pointy things from getting too close. They also look out for his emotional health if they can. The serpent sighed, finishing removing all said pointy objects from his person and arraying them on the table. I may have stepped on a toe or 2 today. I can imagine that's an understatement. Yes, well, what's done is done. Might as well go and see it through now. He shrugged. He's already angry anyway. She drank some more tea. He sat down on his couch and saw a smile begin to form on her face. What's so funny? He questioned, his tone curious. This isn't the first time your little head games got you into some crap, you know. You remember the time when we had to rescue the daimyo's cousin's nephew or some such thrice removed relative or something? I believe it was his niece's daughter. He drawled, a smirk finding its way onto his lips. And then you decided to kidnap her instead. It was Jiraiya's idea. We had to get out, and you know he could never be cruel to little children. What I remember is sanctions. Lots of them. For all of us, and I wasn't even involved in your little stunt. And the worst postings in Cusa ever. It rained for those whole 3 months. You weren't scot-free of your little flubs either, Haim. He chuckled. Need I remind you of a certain incident with a Kumo Chunin and a little sack? Finish that sentence and I will kill you with your own teacup. We were never to speak of that again. The snake chuckled. She smiled back, serving herself some more tea. Still, we always managed to work it out and pull ahead. His smile was still there, but it was a thin thing at his next words. Except for the one time we didn't. The clinking of her spoon stopped. Then, it resumed. Yeah, except for the one time we didn't. They called us heroes for that one time. That might not happen this time. At least, not on a level that matters. What exactly did you do? I'd rather not get into it. If I say, then you'll just get mad and then I'll have to argue with you for 3 hours until you try to punch me or destroy half my apartment, and I'm just not in the mood. You'll find out through the rumor mill in a few days anyway. Then you can come back and try to kill me when I'm in a better mood. She shrugged. Suit yourself, I guess. Wouldn't it be better just to get it all over with in 1 day? Though it would. But you nag. I do not. Old women do that. You said it. Not I. He laughed. She threw the teacup at him. -0 It was 3 weeks away from the exams when the Sanin and his team stood in the village square, with the 3 students decked out in their finest clothes, bought and provided by their sensei upon a strong suggestion from the Hokage. It wasn't every day, after all, when they were to meet the daimyo of Haino Kuni. This itches. Shh, Kyofu hissed. The blonde grumbled. So far, half the village had turned up, lining the roads for a look at their seldom seen ruler. Really. Ultimately the cage answered to the daimyo. The other half was probably there too, just hiding better. It wasn't long before they heard the beginnings of the fanfare, with a lone horseman carrying the daimyo's standard across the village, his horse galloping ahead of a small column that trotted through the village gates. crimson banners and gleaming sets of armor, swords and spears. When one entered a militaristic village, one did so as a military leader. He rode at the column's head, a man far younger than Sarutobi, 30s, or early 40s at most. All his hair was still raven black in a top knot over his head. His beard framing his mouth and chin was neat and trimmed, skin slightly more tan than most Hinokuni citizens. 2 swords were strapped to his waist. The most surprising thing though, was his armor. It was made of wood. Wood scales like a dragon's hide covered the arms and legs in overlapping patterns. Curved pauldrons looked sturdy enough to knock down a door. The curia had the leaf symbol and the daimyo's name etched onto its front. The helm, which was under his left arm, depicted a dragon's head, fangs and scales and eyes that seemed unbelievably detailed given that it was a carving. Betcha he won't do well against Uchihas, Ryoko snickered. He might, Kyofu corrected. Every piece of that armor was supposedly made by the Shodaime himself, and the swords he has were forged by Madara-sama as well. Bet that costs a pretty penny. Naruto thought. If it was even true, of course, a lot of power could be held in mere rumors. If it wasn't, then the daimyo was either really brave or really stupid to be walking around in a suit of wood in a place where people could breathe fire. The man dismounted from his horse, back straight, shoulders spread. He handed off the helmet and marched up the stairs with little pomp or ceremony, making a beeline straight for Sarutobi. Several of his guard, following close behind, Hiruzen stood in the full regalia of his robes as the Hokage of Konohagakure. The man marched right up, spread his hands out and smiled as he enveloped the older man in a hug that seemed to dwarf the elderly ninja. "It's been too long, old friend," he said, loud enough for the words to carry across the space. "It has," Sarutobi answered, much more soft-spoken. The younger man pulled back, crow's feet showing as he smiled. "I only hear from you on formal occasions and funerals. We don't talk anymore." "Why is that?" "Forgive me," Sarutobi answered. "I've been so focused on managing things here that I've neglected other aspects of things that are not bound by duty." The message was clear. We're still weak. The third war had barely been over before the Kyuubi rampaged through Konoha, killing a third of their standing shinobi forces at the time. Couple that with the grievous losses of the third war itself, and Konoha had lost nearly half of their fighting force, 600 to 700 ninja of all ranks. Some of that number was mitigated by the decree that all retired ninja were to return to active service. Still, retired was retired for a reason. Mental health, crippling injury, old age. They weren't what they once were. Many of the young office clerks and assistants had been drafted to field duty, given that the academy graduated 1 class per year for an average of 30 to 40 students. That meant that in 6 years, they'd only recovered numbers-wise 200 of those 700 that had been lost. When taking into account the inevitable casualties, that number was cut down even further. The only thing that consoled this was the simple fact that Kumo, Iwa and Suna had all suffered their own wounds in the wars. It wasn't called the Great War simply because Konoha participated. Endless, unremitting war was fought across every border line and territory in the continent. But even so, Kumo's aggressive military expansion and the known fact that they, just like Iwa, possessed 2 Jinchuriki, made them the most likely to actually be held as the strongest village, not Konoha, whose Jinchuriki, while a prodigy, was still just a genin, and their Kage was an aging man well past his prime, which was not the case of the Yondaime Reikage. In truth, the one thing that was bolstering the village numbers the most, ironically, were the clans. The remnants of the Senju and Uchiha, despite not inheriting the powerful bloodlines of their founders, Madara and Hashirama. Both clans kept strict training programs even for distant relatives that had married outside the clans and had adopted different surnames. Sometimes the children weren't even enrolled and simply nominated for the exams. The same held true at times for the Iburame and the Inuzuka. These were the people pumping more recruits into the village rather than civilians, who sometimes forbade their children from becoming genin at all. Still, 40 per year. And that's only if every team passed their exam. The daimyo smiled. "Message received. I can imagine, but now we can see the fruits of your labor," he exclaimed and turned his eyes towards the pale Sannin he'd ignored till now. "Orochimaru, let me get a good look at you. It's been too long since the Battle of Reeds." Orochimaru bowed at the waist. "I remember. Kotao-sama led the charge that served as the perfect diversion for our infiltration, burned the castle and managed to get back in time to help us cut our way out of the encirclement." The now identified Kotao, at least, Naruto assumed so. He couldn't imagine Orochimaru calling anyone Sama. "I'm looking forward to seeing this team of." He paused, looking them over for the very first time, freezing his gaze on Naruto. His mouth hung open a little and Naruto saw him swallow. "What is your name, boy?" "My name's Uzumaki Naruto," he answered. "Horyu, show res." The daimyo held up his hand, silencing his guard's rebuke. A smile danced on his face. "I trust," he began. "You'll give those Iwan in quite the show, won't you?" The question was rhetorical, and before Naruto could answer, the man turned and looked at Sarutobi and Orochimaru. Both men's faces were calm and placid, reflecting nothing as their liege all but beamed at them. "We are very pleased," he said with a hearty laugh, "and now it's time to please you. Come, we bring gifts from the capital for all of you." At those words, some more men stepped forward, these carrying crates and chests between them. They were led by a younger man, who bore some likeness to Kowtow. He couldn't be older than 18 or 19. He bowed, greeting the men formally as the soldiers behind him did the same. "Seratobi, Orochimaru, this is my son, Takechio." They bowed, and the daimyo paused again, his eyes blinking for a moment before his smile became megawatt bright. "Tsunade," he yelled, hands flying open to embrace the woman. Tsunade for her part masked the rather permanent scowl she'd been wearing for the last few days or weeks really, ever since she'd discovered just why Saru was pissed at Orochi. Now she was pissed too, but Orochimaru did a stand-up job of avoiding her for nearly a month, ducking into hidey holes and safe houses he had scattered throughout the territory. He could have just faced her and fought like they usually did, but he was enjoying the fact that, eluding her, just pissed her off more. Today her scowl had been no different, and she wasn't at her sensei's side for the sole reason that Seratobi feared she might try something incredibly embarrassing given her temper and Orochimaru's willingness to goad said temper. You'd never know from the smile and the hug she returned. She seemed genuinely happy to see the daimyo, and he was definitely happy to see her. Kowtow, no one missed the lack of Sama at the end of that. "Been too long. Now why are you hiding all the way back here?" he asked, pulling away and looking at her. "Got here late," she smoothly lied. "Some idiot banged his head and I had to patch it up. You know how it goes. Got to squeeze in here just before your guy rode up with the flag." The man smiled, then he looked behind him, gesturing as he spoke. "Oh, I've not introduced you to my son, Takechio." The younger male stepped forward with a pleasant smile, bowing in respect. Tsunade bowed back. "Never met a prince before, nor I." A work of art, miss. With nearly any other male it would have sounded like a cheap pickup line, but the little princeling actually made it work somehow, even as Naruto choked on his own spit somewhere behind them. Then the prince's father walked up behind him. Thin nose, strong jaw, high cheekbones, fair skin. "You have beautiful children together, father," the younger man gasped, appalled and blushing furiously. Tsunade didn't meet their eyes and didn't say a word. Instead she raised up her hand, showing off the ring. The daimyo's face contorted in pain. "Oh my girl, you wound me." He patted his son on the shoulder as though consoling him on the loss. "Who is the lucky man?" "I must meet the man who ended up taking away my dreams of beautiful heirs. You're a shameless flirt, you know that." Tsunade chuckled as Dan coiled his arm around her waist, bowing as best he could while keeping a hold on her. "Don't tell my wife," he quipped in response before he looked at Dan. He frowned. Dan became nervous. "I don't recognize you," he said after a moment, then he smiled. "But you are the luckiest man in the world." The white-haired ninja nodded and bowed again with a smile. "I know it. Still, you didn't invite me to the wedding, so you'll name your firstborn after me to make up for it." "We haven't celebrated the wedding yet." "Oh good, then we'll celebrate it in my summer home, or wherever you want. I'll pay for everything and you'll name your first child after me in gratitude." "You are dead set on this first child thing, aren't you?" Tsunade crossed her arms. "I wanted you married to my son." "You've shot that down, so I'm aiming a little lower," he laughed. He turned to look and saw his soldiers still holding the crates. He blinked at them curiously. "Have you all been standing there this whole time? Give out the gifts. What are you doing waiting? Go go go." The men immediately began moving towards the various nobles and clans they could recognize, and the gifts chests had been designated for. Kowtow shook his head. "Have to tell them when to breathe or they'll forget," he muttered. -0. It was morning when he arrived at this place, the sun barely peeking over the horizon. He and his team would be leaving the village with the daimyo's entourage that day, but before that, one last little contingency. He marched through the familiar halls that hadn't changed in 30 years, passing by doors of classrooms before he finally opened one. Its lone occupant turned and looked at the sound, a small smile of crooked teeth lighting her face. "Ah," she said, turning her eyes back to her work. "To what do I owe this exactly? Did you break something?" Orochimaru snorted. "I didn't do that even when I was enrolled here." He looked down at the desk where multiple strips of cut-up paper were spread throughout. "What's this?" She took a second to release the scissors and adjust her grip before pulling the thing in her hands apart to reveal. "Paper dolls," she exclaimed, laughing at the string of small girl shapes hanging from her fingers. "My great-granddaughter, she was just born 2 days ago." "I hadn't heard, we didn't say." "So what brings you to my neck of the woods?" "Make it quick, I've only got a few minutes before I have to go get ready." Orochimaru shrugged and held out a letter. "I find myself woefully low on people who can keep a secret. Gee, thanks. Nice to know I'm first choice here." She reached out her hand to grip it, finding the envelope sealed. "What's going on? Taking something of a dangerous mission?" "I've argued with Sensei." It was slightly more heated than normal, "and I simply figured I'd leave this here with you in case something happens." And not Tsunade or Anko, because Tsunade and Anko are both curious. They'd open it,
My words are for Sarutobi-sensei, not them. Kakashi is an Anbu shinobi. He's ethically bound to not keep secrets from his Hokage no matter what they are if they involve village affairs. Gee, what the hell am I? Chopped liver. If you're gonna go out and do something stupid I have to tell him too. There was silence after that before she opened up a drawer, stuffed it in and slammed it shut. I'll keep my mouth shut in one condition. What's that? Whatever stupid thing you're planning doesn't involve the dismemberment, or death or poisoning or whatever else can happen of your students. If you're the one putting your neck out to be chopped off, that's your problem. The kids are mine, I promise, he answered. She nodded. All right then, go and be a productive citizen. She leaned forward. Don't make me regret trusting you, he nodded, stood up and left. She went back to cutting up her paper dolls. -0. Naruto washed his face and brushed his teeth, feeling a smirk gracing his lips. The Chunin exams, right, on time. He was one step closer to be where he needed to be. He got dressed, double-checked his supplies and made ready to walk out the door when he stopped. There was someone there. "An-chan," he greeted with a smile. It was less weird calling her An-chan, at least for now, while he still got used to the idea that Itachi was a girl. She nodded. "You're leaving today, yeah?" "Chunin exams," he answered. She nodded again, reached into her cloak and pulled out a pencil-thin scroll.
"You and I have been playing this game for years," he said. "We've done this, over and over and over again ever since I took on my responsibilities. It has to end already. This is unhealthy and one of us will end up killing the other if it doesn't stop. So how about a truce, Inoki-sama?" someone called. The diminutive Cage turned, glaring at the Chunin at the door. "What?" The young man blinked. "Who are you talking to, and why are you standing on your desk?" The Cage looked down at his feet standing on polished mahogany. Directly across from him was a stack of paperwork that, even with him standing at the same level, was still taller than him. He narrowed his eyes menacingly at it. He reached up, picked up a chunk of it and plopped it down on the desk, leaving the main stack at just below his chin. Nodding to himself in satisfaction, he turned back to the Chunin. "Never mind that," he dismissed. "What have you got for me?" The man fully opened the door, revealing more paperwork in a cart. Chunin application forms, order entry requests and a few other that. Sachikage slapped his forehead, dragging his hand down his face as he droned him out. He turned to glare at the stacks he blinked when he realized that the main stack was taller than him. Their breeding. Somehow he had a feeling that this was going to be a long day. -0 for the group of children, especially Ryoko. The novelty of riding a horse vanished rather quickly. Horses sucked, they stunk, they bounced, they chafed, left you sore for 3 days after you got off, and they stole your ramen. That last part held true only for one of them, but the point still stood. Horse riding was not faring well with them. Given the fact, however, that they needed to travel with the daimyo, they couldn't run at ninja speed and walking would just slow everyone down, so they were stuck with this. They were on the last leg of their trip, only a few hours from Iwagakure after nearly 4 hours ride already. "My lord," one of the samurai said, riding alongside the daimyo, "we should rest the horses here for now. We've ridden them hard today." "How long do you think?" the man asked, patting his beast affectionately. "Until noon at least," the samurai responded. "All right then." He seemed ready to dismount when a ghostly pale rider marched up beside him. "That wouldn't be wise," Orochimaru commented. "We're already here. Every second we delay is a second longer for word to reach Inoki, or more likely the Anbu and Chunin patrols that can converge around our position for a swift attack. We should get through this as quick as possible to reach the neutrality of an official Chunin exam invitation." The daimyo considered. "All right then." He looked at the samurai. "It's noon now. Let's keep moving." The man blinked, evidently not getting the joke. "It's not noon, Myla, I am kowtow. When I say it's noon, it's noon. Now let's move." The horses trotted forward. The teenagers groaned miserably. "I'm never getting on another horse again," Kyofu growled. "I'm never leaving the village again," Ryoko offered. "I'm going to eat them," Naruto promised. "Chop them up, put them in ramen and eat them." The two girls tossed him a look. Evidently Naruto could get violent if you stole his ramen. They rode through the woodlands, where Konoha's forest was dense with oaks and other such trees. The colder climates of Iwagakure's mountains in the north were thick with prickly pine trees whose heavy scent was like a heady mist in the air. "They're here already," Orochimaru hissed towards the daimyo, and Naruto's ears twitched. 2 horses behind. Turning his eyes towards the trees, he searched, finding nothing but the rustling of leaves in the wind to indicate a shinobi. He spread out his nature-enhanced senses, feeling the chakra signatures around him. His teammates first, Orochi's stronger presence second, the strongest here. In the trees though, he found 6 others, very close. He trailed his eyes straight upwards. He still couldn't see anything. Jounin then, Jounin or Anbu. They rode on through the day, and more ninja, all in various states of fatigue or lack thereof, gathered around the column as it progressed, all staying out of sight, though some less experienced members slipped and let themselves be seen by him.
The men could actually feel the pounding of their horses' hearts and their winded breaths against their shins by the time the walls of the village came into view. By that time Naruto could count 22 at their backs, and 100 more in front. -0. Come on, hurry up, she demanded, pulling on his arm to help him get a grip and then running to the other side to help haul up the leg he was trying to hook up over the edge. We're cutting class, Kuro-chan. The boy huffed and puffed, struggling to climb over the edge of the roof that was connected to the walls. Come on, what would you rather do? Sit and listen to Mibuyuki-sensei talking about Shodaime, or see what's coming this way? That is everyone in such a fuss, we'll get in trouble. Akatsuchi grunted, finally pulling himself up and over the edge. Not if you hurry up. Come on, -0. No. Get out. I refuse. So you can't refuse, you're that Tsuchikage, was the secretary's droll response, carting in yet another load of forms. This is slavery. It isn't, sir. You get paid. It's cruelty and unlawful torture of the elderly official. There's no such law, so there is now. You'll have to sign a form for that, sir. Thanks, sir. Pick your face off the desk. It won't help you. Anoki glared at her. His secretary was a professional, non-shinobi, wore simple but proper dresses for her post. No nonsense, always on time, responsible and constantly on top of everything, especially him. He hated her. He would have fired her, but then he had the feeling his staff would just find someone worse. That's what they'd done for the last 74. They just got tougher and tougher and tougher and tougher, but those had all been ninja. He could always, ultimately order them to do something else. His staff had wised up. This was a goddamn civilian, who was paid almost as much as his Anbu captain. Where the hell said money was coming from he had no idea. Otherwise he would have probably frozen the funds pending a full, lengthy and thorough investigation. So she was always on his case. He couldn't even sneak out. That's right. Somehow a 30-something, chubby civilian woman that stood at 5'0" was able to stop a cage from sneaking out. How this worked he'd stopped trying to figure out 2 years ago. The door opened. Tsuchikage-sama, he almost blanched before he realized the young man had no papers on him. Yes, what help do you need? He asked, almost eagerly. The Chunin opened his mouth to speak but paused as a strange whisper caressed his ear. Save me? He looked around oddly before he remembered what he was here for. "Yes, sir. At the gates." "Yees," the pudge-nosed man nodded. "Who's at the gates?" The daimyo." Anoki blinked. Michizu didn't say he was coming, he muttered aloud, hopping down from his chair and getting ready to march out of his office. "It's not our daimyo," so that made him pause. "Who then?" "Kumo." "Q, sir." The Chunin swallowed and was about to answer when Ryautenbin. "Open your gates. This is not how you treat invited guests." -0. "Hey, they're calling Tsuchikage-sama, aren't they?" "Yeah," Kurotsuchi answered, holding herself up on crossed arms, resting just beneath her chest on the wall's railing, her feet dangling. Akatsuchi standing beside her on his tiptoes. -0. The Sannin pulled back his index and middle finger from the side of the daimyo's throat, the visible chakra receding from the pale tips. "Was that really necessary?" he asked. "Best to declare our intentions for everyone to hear," Kowtow answered, clearing his throat with some light coughs. "Now they can't attack and allege something else so easily." "Easy being the relative term here," the Sannin grinned. Anything starts to happen, I order you to get those children back towards the border." Orochimaru said nothing for a moment. "Our duty would be to guard you," he said simply. Protecting the daimyo was the duty of all shinobi, no exceptions, not even genin. "To hell with your duty," the man answered simply. "You get that boy back across the border. Revenge in 10 years when he's older and can take out a third of their army is still revenge. Pretty obvious for you, wasn't it?" He chuckled. "You may as well have held up a sign. Speaking of which, I thought you would have changed some of that by now. I can't hold a jutsu on him from a distance strong enough to fool Inoki. Might as well just let him and everyone else find out up front as opposed to hiding it and having them find out later with an outrage. The fire that burns slowly, lasts longer but spreads the least." He nodded. "I see." The gates groaned open. Konohas were made of wood. Like most significant structures and items of Konoha made of wood, it had been forged by the Shodaime Hokage himself. Iwa's gates were made of stone, black as midnight. Obsidian glinted in the afternoon sun. The village symbol carved proud into the singular southern village gate. They said it couldn't be broken. Forged by some mysterious art of the Nidaime, its magnificence was even greater than Konoha's. It was also heavier. So when the doors finally opened fully, it was no surprise to see that at the other side were 2 massive elephant summons pushing both respective gate, armored and ready for battle as well. There also seemed to be quite a few helpers, ones with glinting forehead protectors, and a short, 3'0" old man marching right towards them. "Come on." The daimyo laughed. "Let's get off. Wouldn't want him to feel worse," he whispered. Orochimaru's smile grew a little wider as he, the daimyo, and the head of the man's guard dismounted. He saw his students do the same behind them and refrained from saying anything. They'd just make things more interesting. The Sannin marched at the daimyo's side, placing the most subtle of jinjutsu over his own face to make his rather distinctive features more bland. They stood directly across from the old cage, two Iwa Jounin at the man's side, him staring up at the daimyo and the daimyo staring down. Being the guest, Kowtow bowed his head first, hand and fist meeting between the two of them. Ryautenbin, he greeted through use of his long-standing title. It has been a long time, Inoki bowed. If only just. Your visit is rather early, Magajiro Dono, he said. The spectator open portion of the exam is nearly 2 months away as of yet. We're competing. Orochimaru chose to speak up, dropping the subtle illusion, his pale face morphing out of the shadow of the jinjutsu. The Jounin flinched. Inoki's face grew severe, hard as chiseled stone. You, he growled, -0 Kuro-chan. That's Orochimaru of the Sannin. No way. Can't be. She narrowed her eyes. Grandpa would kill him if it was. It is, Akatsuchi insisted. Mibuyuki-sensei said he was all pale like a ghost and had black hair. There are probably plenty of people in Konoha like that, she countered, knowing that her grandfather, the strongest ninja in the whole village, would wipe the floor with the Sannin if he ever came here and didn't hide like he was so famous. For -0, the Sannin plastered on the sickening smile that still haunted the nightmares of Iwa veterans. Me, he laughed. Me. Remind me, what was that splendid name your brave elites gave me after the night raids of rice fields? It does me so good to hear it from time to time. It brings back the memory of their screams. He turned his eyes toward one of the Jounin, the youngest one. A gleam of serpentine eyes and a potent, focused killing intent had the man break out in a cold sweat, a visible shudder running up his spine. His smile grew a bit. Yes, that was it, the death dealer. Enough. Inoki cut his hand through the air in a sharp gesture, and the suffocating illusion was lifted from the younger man. I agree, the daimyo rumbled. We've come to enter your team into the exams, Oro-kun, not to have you goading Ryautenbin's men in the streets. You actually have a team? Inoki raised an eyebrow. He'd heard rumors, but the thought of this twisted creature with students was beyond his belief. The Sannin turned to look over his shoulder. Your eyes must be going in your old age, Ryautenbin. He stepped aside, allowing the elder man the full view of the 3 kids. Inoki ignored the insult and took one look. Then he froze, his face contorted in a seething fury. Naruto felt the killing intent slam into him like a physical blow. He was almost caught off guard by it. Though there had been some hostility when they first met in his own time, it was a bucket of water compared to this ocean that was leveled out before him. Then he remembered that it had only been 7 years or so since the end of the war. It had been 16 by the time he met the man the first time. 16 years is time enough for tempers to cool and memories to dull. 7, evidently, was a whole different story. Inoki took one step forward and Orochimaru was there, blocking his path and his line of sight again, smiling glibly though his limbs were tensed for an attack. You. The words were such a seething mass of loathing Orochimaru could almost feel the acid burning the back of the cage's throat. Me. He laughed again. -0 Holy crap, that was intense. Ryoko breathed a little easier as soon as the killing intent let up. What in the world happened there? Kyofu shuddered. That wasn't just some random prejudice. It couldn't have been. Naruto frowned, droning them out, already hearing the escalating voices between Inoki, Orochi and the daimyo, watching how the ninja around the gate tensed and the samurai at their backs did the same. It couldn't go like this. He didn't know Inoki well, but he knew Iwa ninja. He knew them, fought with them, bled with them and watched friends die beside them. Just like before the prejudice was here, it was just fresher in their minds. If he could overcome it before, he could overcome it now. But he couldn't just let this whole thing spiral out of control with Orochimaru goading the man into a conversation that would leave Inoki frothing at the mouth for a chance to kill them again. It couldn't go like this. Without any warning, he stepped forward and moved to march around the serpent. What are you doing? Ryoko hissed, moving to grab him before he darted out of her reach and peeked his body around Orochimaru's leg to look at Inoki, who was staring up at the two men. Instantly, in the most childlike voice he could muster, which was rather easy all things considered, he spoke clearly and loudly. Hi, he smiled. I'm Uzumaki Naruto. Wanna be friends? It was rather amazing to be standing at the cusp of a city, surrounded by more than 100 people, and yet have it so quiet one could hear a pin drop. -0 Hey, who's that kid? What did he say? Kurotsuchi asked. Don't know, he's smaller than us. Everyone's smaller than you. -0 Inoki swiveled his head around, giving him the most incredulous look anyone had ever seen on the man's face. You what? He balked. Naruto stepped around Orochimaru's leg fully, standing nearly at eye level with the cage. Well, I'm friends with Sarujiji, and he's the Hokage. You're another cage too, so you wanna be friends too? He smiled the megawatt bright smile. Inoki's face still hadn't changed from that gobsmacked look, as though his brain was still trying to process the original query and just kept finding a hitch of logic or an error along the way. Finally he seemed to snap to his senses, features growing stern again, though the killing intent was far less than it had been before. No, Naruto frowned.
pouting like a child. Why not? The daimyo nodded, chuckling. Yes, why not Ryutenbin? He seems to be a good enough boy. The cage looked like he was about to curse the man out when he bit his tongue. We'll make the arrangements for your stay. Give us 1 hour. Then he turned and marched away. Orochimaru watched the small man leave before drawing his gaze down towards the top of Naruto's head. He hadn't said anything, but he knew the boy had just recognized the danger, and acted to manipulate with those words. Very curious -0 huh? That's it. This was boring. Akatsuchi concluded, pulling himself back off the railing. What happened? Kurotsuchi growled. I didn't hear a thing. Come on. The bigger student insisted, plucking her off the railing. Sensei's gonna come out and find us. No, she's not, she's just gonna ahem. Both children paused, turning slowly to see the stern glare of their sensei. It was all Kuro-chan's idea. It was not, she bellowed -0 down below. Marching through the gates, Inoki spoke softly to his 2 aides. Call back Han and Roshi, he whispered to one, who nodded before gesturing towards the other. Get them set up in the 4th manse, that's right beside the tower, so he said, somewhat alarmed. We reserve that for when Michizu-sama arrives. If they're staying here for a month, I want to know how many times they breathe. Get them set up in the 4th manse. Michizu-sama will understand the inconvenience, should he arrive for the spectator portion of the exams. The 8 nodded -0. By the time they themselves were riding through the gates a few minutes later, Kowtow could be heard speaking to the pale Sannin as well. If he was truly looking for an excuse, that little stunt you pulled could have been it, he said. It's best they feel they should keep their eyes on me as opposed to others who will draw their attention, the Sannin responded. The man grunted, shifting in his saddle. Just remember, you're not invincible, or alone. And our show of force here is merely that, a show. If Inoki's pushed far enough, he can take our heads. So don't antagonize too much, he ordered. The Sannin nodded, smirking. I'll refrain from commenting on his height then, -0. It was already approaching night by the time there was an opportunity for him to speak with enough privacy. When Naruto was marching back to his room a little later than the rest of his team, and the daimyo and his guards were still settling into theirs with the greater luggage load. What was that back there, Naruto? The blonde stiffened in surprise, and Orochimaru saw how he remained tense, on guard. The boy never did trust him. One couldn't stay in a constant state of tension for months on end, but whenever he singled him out like he was doing now, this thing would come back, just like he was when he woke up in the hospital 2 years ago, looking at him as though for all intents and purposes he was getting ready to tear the boy's face off. What was what? He asked, turning around to look at him. Don't play dumb, he said. The normal smirking visage was nowhere to be found. Inoki, at the gates, you knew full well what you were doing. I wasn't doing anything. Just asked him if he wanted to be my friend. Naruto glared, as if daring him to keep pushing this. The serpent's gaze bore right into him. Inoki leveled enough killing intent on you specifically to have thrown a veteran ninja unconscious. Your teammates felt the fear rise in their stomachs. You didn't? Yeah, well, why did he do that anyway? What made him get so angry at me? Naruto feigned his ignorance of the circumstances, hoping to throw the serpent off the conversation. Orochimaru was having none of it though. As much as he'd changed with the incident that altered his memories 2 years ago, he'd still known the boy since he was an infant. More than that, you weren't surprised, nor did you take a moment to collect yourself. After a man demonstrates that he actively desires your death, you proceeded to defuse an escalating situation by distracting a cage with a question no one in their right mind would ask at the time. Maybe I'm just not in my right mind, he laughed. What is going on? Nothing is going on, the blonde hissed. You're just being paranoid, he tilted his head. Very well, keep your secrets. But this conversation isn't over, the genin glared, turning around and marching towards his room before closing the door. Orochimaru was left feeling like something of a hypocrite at being irritated at his students lying -0. It was nearly a week later when the 3 Konoha genin stood within the building where the Chunin exams were to begin. The building wasn't at all impressive. It was a single-story, more a large, emptied-out warehouse than anything really. There weren't even chairs or seats. Naruto was getting the impression this was just the place every team was to meet up in order to march over to wherever the real test was going to begin. These are a lot of foreign genin teams, Kyofu breathed looking around. The warehouse was absolutely huge in terms of square feet and space, but even so, if any more teams arrived they would be bumping shoulders with people they didn't know. Mostly Iwanins though, that kinda makes us the foreigners here, Ryoko said. This is crazy, she said. Whether she was referring to the number of people or the fact that they were the only Konoha team with a sensei crazy or careless enough to bring them here was completely up in the air. Speaking of the snake, he'd been in something of a rush today for some reason. The last week had been spent fine-tuning chakra control and elemental manipulation. Ryoko specifically, her wind blade could definitely cut through virtually anything a genin would have on him or her here, but it still couldn't cut through a significantly sized stone in a single strike like he demanded. She almost could,
but to Orochimaru, almost hitting the target means you ultimately missed the target and have only succeeded in wasting your knife. Still, Naruto, from his experience, felt his teammates were far better prepared for this exam than any of the rookie 9 had been for their first attempt so long ago. Orochimaru was. The blonde paused, face scrunching up at the near thought, a demanding teacher. Still they didn't seem to realize it, which was fair considering that Orochimaru monopolized so much of their time. They hadn't really had the chance to interact or measure themselves against any of their old classmates. Like the guy was worried they'd embarrass him by losing, so he made sure they were ready before he went to show them off. Don't worry guys, we'll kick all their asses, Naruto nearly shouted. Don't gloat, Kyofu warned, we'll only draw needless attention. Too late for that. The blonde laughed, pointing out the sight of 4 Iowa Genin teams glaring daggers at them from across the room. They glared for a few more seconds before Ryoko got fed up. What are you rockheads looking at? Some of them looked ready to step forward before one Genin, one who Naruto suspected he might have fought alongside during the war, held them back with some brusque words. Maybe if the blonde could picture some facial hair he'd be able to place it. Ryoko scoffed the next word under her breath. Idiots, you're all alone, you really shouldn't make a spectacle of yourself. The team turned around, blinking at the sight of a Kirigakure Genin they didn't recognize. Well, 2 of them did. Naruto would remember that face anywhere, even if he didn't remember the name. Yeah well, what's it to you? Ryoko shrugged. We can take care of, don't be rude, Kyofu interrupted somewhat sternly. As the eldest of the team, she was sort of adopting the role of disciplinarian peacekeeper. When Orochimaru wasn't around, it seemed. She bowed. I apologized, but we didn't catch your name. Kimimaro-kun, another voice spoke, and the face of the person that walked up behind the pale ninja was one Naruto also recognized. The name jumped to his lips this time too. Haku? The dark-haired Genin turned, features scrunching up in confusion when looking down at him. Do I know you? Naruto froze for a moment, stiffening as he realized just how massive a slip-up this was, especially with the way his teammates were looking at him. No, I just heard there was a pretty wait. Was Haku a guy or a girl here? After Itachi, anything was fair game. Genin from Kiri. Figured that kinda had to be you. He hoped to sweet God above Haku was a girl here, or he might just have the earth swallow him. With an earth affinity he could probably bury himself easy enough. Haku laughed. That's very sweet of you. Or little Neru-chan has a crush, Ryoko teased, reaching down to pinch his cheeks as he swatted her hand aside. They grow up so fast, Kyofu laughed. Not you too, Fu-chan. You're supposed to be the nice one, he whined. Ryoko stuffed him in a headlock. Oh, so I'm not nice? Does this seem nice? He shouted back, glad for the distraction the antics were providing. Haku giggled again, and the burning question of male or female was still branded in Naruto's skull. At any rate, both our teams should be going. She tapped Kimimaro on the shoulder. They're starting to do the listings to see who's present and who's not. Naruto stood up on his tiptoes to see a dozen Chunin had filed into one side of the warehouse and were checking teams off the list as they filed closer towards them. Looks like the Chunin exams had begun.